our night spot. Has been for years.
All right.
Call to order the Gladstone Planning Commission, Gladstone City Hall, 525 Portland Avenue, Gladstone, Oregon, 97027. Tuesday, December 19th, 2017. The time is now approximately 6:30. Roll call.
Commissioner Preble?
Here.
Commissioner Natalie Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Malachi?
Here.
Commissioner Poole?
Here.
Commissioner Wentz?
Here.
Commissioner Pat Smith?
Here.
Chair Rowlett?
Here. Let's salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome. Tonight, on our agenda, we've got, and excuse me, I'm getting over one of those awful respiratory things. We're going to approve the minutes, approve or amend. We're going to look at new correspondence that's come in since the packet. And then I want to open up for public testimony on anything that does not have to do with the downtown thing, which we'll be having a public hearing on. Everybody will get a chance to speak on that. And after we do the non-related, if anybody has anything they want to say, we'll have a public hearing on to amend the comprehensive plan to include updated downtown revitalization plan. And that'll be a legislative hearing, and I'll explain the difference between that and the ones we usually do when we get to that. So, do we need to amend the minutes?
So, on the we don't have page numbers on the minutes. The end of item number 2, just before the motion was made to approve, it mentions that I pointed out that the previous application had expired. But if I recall, I was actually explaining to them why we were doing the new expiration clause. I don't think I was telling them that their application had expired. I was talking about a previous applicant and the impetus for us doing the requirement.
I'm sorry, will you say where that was at again, please?
So right above where we made the motion to approve at the end of item 2, the very last sentence above that, it mentions that I pointed out the previous application had expired and we were adding a clause about the extension. I was actually explaining what the new clause was and why we were adding it.
Okay.
I wasn't saying that their application had expired. I was explaining that we were doing this to prevent that problem.
So the way it reads, it does look like what you just said.
Right.
So how do we amend the minutes, or how would you like to do that?
We'll go back and we'll verify just what he had said on the recording, and then we'll make the changes, and then I will bring them, once those have been corrected, send them on to you, and then we'll have the amended ones ready for your signature.
Thank you so much. Anything, commissioners?
Pretty straight. Good.
No. Libby? Nope. Motion?
Feel free. Jump out, Natalie.
What?
Feel free.
Oh, go ahead, Malachi.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes as modified by Tammy when it's all said and done.
I second.
Made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. Motion passes. So we've approved the minutes from the last meeting on 21 November. Do we have any correspondence?
The only correspondence is what was presented to commissioners at your table there.
And how do you want to get that into the record? Should we have somebody read it?
David?
So you can simply say it's part of the record. You can read it, you can summarize it. It doesn't have to be read in order to be in the record.
I think I would like to have somebody read the whole thing. Susan, would you like to do that?
Or would that be considered a
Does it
testimony?
matter that it's part of this public hearing?
Why don't, if we're going to do it that way, why don't we wait until you get to public testimony?
Okay,
I think it's the cleanest
that
thing.
sounds like a better idea.
Okay.
Do we have any other correspondence?
Do not.
None? So, we're going to have a public hearing tonight to amend the comprehensive plan to include the updated downtown revitalization plan. And I believe we're having a presentation related to that. And when we start the hearing, we'll go to that. I'm going to read the land use hearing format, and then before I do that, I want everybody to kind of understand that this is a legislative hearing. And what we do tonight, what we're going to do is take a look at the plan and make a recommendation to City Council on parts or all of that plan, modify that before we submit it to City Council. And they will kind of do this whole hearing thing again, just like we are tonight. And then they'll vote to accept that or not, the way it's written, or make modifications. And then from that point, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done before there's any changes that are going to be made, which will be code amendments and different things. It's going to be a while. So what we do tonight is you're not going to wake up tomorrow and see a new downtown Gladstone. It's a long process, and it's been a long process, and people have put a lot of time and energy into this so far. So, I'm going to read this. The public hearing is now open for the purpose of considering, and from the agenda, it's amend comprehensive plan to include the updated downtown revitalization plan.
And then not the other side?
I think it's that one, because this is quasi-judicial on this
Yeah.
side. The procedure we'd like to follow is planning department report, which looks like we're not going to have. We're going to have a report from some other people. Applicant testimony, proponent testimony, opponent testimony, applicant rebuttal, decision to continue or close the hearing. It says City Council, Planning Commission discussion and decision. This is really an informal type of hearing, so we don't need to go through all the formal stuff. So what I want to do is give everybody a chance to state their opinions, and this is nice for the Planning Commission because this is one of the few times that we can have opinions where we don't have to follow the law like in our regular hearings for like a remodel of the Safeway store. We have guidelines that we have to follow when we approve design review and stuff like that. Tonight, I have lots of opinions about everything, and I'll probably make some of those. And I think, it's a good opportunity for us to do that. And I want to stay as informal as I can. And I know everybody's going to be respectful when they speak, and everybody will get a chance to say everything they want to say. And we're here the same reason you are, to make and keep Gladstone a good place to live.
Do you want them to use the cards tonight?
No, I don't want to use the cards. I think we're going to just go. This is not a huge group, and I didn't hear a lot of rumbling out there, so let's just kind of go with it. So with that, let's open the hearing and have our presentation.
Good evening.
My name is Jenny Lipscomb, and I wanted to just do a few introductory remarks before the consultant does our presentation. The agenda item is a public hearing on the Gladstone Revitalization Plan. The proposal before the Planning Commission is to recommend this plan to the City Council for adoption into the city's comprehensive plan. Adoption would recognize the plan as the guiding document for future planning and public improvement efforts downtown. The Downtown Revitalization Plan is the culmination of a planning process that began in 2015 with a grant awarded by Metro to make a comprehensive look at the transportation and land use choices along Portland Avenue. The grant project called for analysis of the barriers and opportunities to develop along the corridor, the development of a vision, and a recommended implementation strategy to bring it all about. The active project planning process began in the fall of 2016. I was hired as the project manager for City on this project, and a team of consultants was hired through a competitive process to lead the planning process, conduct the analysis, and prepare the plan and its supporting documents. Throughout this process, many members of the community have volunteered their time and effort to the project. This project had 2 advisory committees and an additional stakeholders committee, which represented a broad mixture of citizens, residents, business owners, and property owners from within the downtown and across the Gladstone. In addition, the process involved 2 public open houses, a community survey, and additional public meeting to present the final recommendations. The thoughtful discussion and debate of these groups have helped create and shape this plan and the recommendations within it. And now our consultants are going to do a presentation of the plan.
Thank you. My name is Brendan Buckley. I am a consultant with the firm of Johnson Economics, and as Jenny said in the introduction, to sort of work on this planning process that was kicked off in 2016. The city hired, through a grant from Metro, the city hired a team of consultants to work on this plan that we'll be talking about in a moment. And so that team consisted of my firm, Johnson Economics, Angelo Planning Group, and Kittleson and Associates Transportation Planners and Engineering Specialists, and Sarah Architects to do design work. So we'll be seeing a lot of their work tonight. I'm going to give a presentation that just gives an overview of the plan and the process a little bit, and talk about what it is the plan recommends. Before I do that, I think just quickly we'll talk about what it is that the Planning Commission is considering tonight. The proposal before you is to make a recommendation to the City Council on this plan, whether or not to approve this plan and make it part of the comp plan. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what that means and what that doesn't mean. It's a very long document, as you've all seen. It has a lot of appendices, and it represents a lot of work. But as the chair said, what you're considering tonight and what the City Council will be considering when they look at the plan is not to adopt and enact every recommendation that is in this plan. Specifically, what they're talking about, will be considering, is to adopt the plan or recognize it and officially recognize it in the city's comprehensive plan. So what that means is that the comprehensive plan would reflect in its language that the downtown revitalization plan is an official guiding document for how the community would like the downtown area to develop. And that, along with that, comes some language changes in the comprehensive plan itself to make that recognition official. But it doesn't make any changes to the development code, the zoning code. It doesn't enact any of the specific development code recommendations that are included in the plan. The plan also, as we'll be discussing, includes some implementation measures. It doesn't, adoption of the plan by the council does not instantly put those into effect. This is just adopting the plan as the future plan for how these things will be considered and carried out going forward. So,
Before you start, if anybody would like to watch the presentation on the TV, just please, we're really informal tonight. Just get up and help yourselves to a spot that you like. If you need a chair, I'll help you move a chair over, whatever you want.
Go ahead and let them see I can move. Easier for me.
Yeah, we've got a book here, so, you know, if you guys want to see the presentation, just go ahead and move around as much as you want.
I'll just take this moment to introduce myself, as I'll be interjecting and helping answer questions later. I'm Darcy Rudzinski with Angelo Planning Group, and I was one of the consultants on this project.
Thank you. All right, I think we're ready.
Okay. And so, as we were saying, this project kicked off a while ago now. It started with a grant from Metro that was originally applied for in 2015, and through the process and getting the project worked out and so on, the official sort of kickoff for the planning process itself was in around September of last year, 2016. And so it's been a year-long process. We've done a lot of work to move this forward over that time, and gone through some iterations and discussions that we'll be talking about. But basically, I want to start by talking a little bit about why this project was undertaken, and the goals and sort of the ideas behind it, and you know, why the community applied for that grant in the first place. And so this is just a picture of existing conditions in the downtown, and the grant application, or the idea behind this project, mentioned some specific things when it was talking about the need to undertake this project and look at revitalization in the downtown. Some of the challenges identified that are currently facing Gladstone are that the downtown is an underperforming town center. It has difficult multimodal transportation access. Multimodal is a fancy way for meaning also bikes and pedestrians, as well as cars. There was underdevelopment and underutilization of land were identified. It mentioned that the area was, quote, mired in the past and, quote, visually unappealing. The conditions hinder the marketability for new business and development, and there is confused or ineffective zoning. So those were all some of the challenges identified at the outset of the project, but there are also, of course, great opportunities here, and that is that the Portland Avenue area is the heart of the community. It is a retail center for the surrounding neighborhoods. It's the traditional Main Street, obviously. It's a civic center. This is where the library and the city hall, the fire station are all located. It's a connection to between the city and the Clackamas River. It's the connection of the trolley trail in particular, the bike and pedestrian trail that right now kind of ends at Abernathy. And other positives are that there's a voter-approved City Hall library project that, you know, we understand is in process, but that is there. And there's also was a 2008 streetscape plan to build upon, which we used in our planning process. And finally, there's a lot to leverage. There's a lot going on in Gladstone itself. There's a lot that's happening in nearby communities in Milwaukee and in Oregon City, and it's a good time to talk about how to tie these all together using Portland Avenue as an important access between the communities. So the goals stated at the outset were obviously related to many of the things I just mentioned, but the goals were to maximize the potential of the town center, create dramatic positive change, look for improved economic and residential climate, more pedestrian and bike-friendly routes, preserve existing business base and character, and inform future public projects that the city might undertake to achieve all these things. So those were our considerations at the outset as we set into the planning process. And the project process began at the end of the end of the summer of 2016 at the Gladstone Community Festival. We had a booth set up there to start introducing the community to the idea that we were going to be undertaking this. And through the process, we've had 2 public open houses, one in October and then one in February, sort of at different key points in the process to have get public input at key points. We have had 2 advisory committees throughout on this project. We had a technical advisory committee and a citizens advisory committee. Each of those met 4 times over the process. We also had a separate committee called stakeholders, and those was a lot. They were a lot of business owners, property owners along Portland Avenue itself. We had 3 meetings with them, and so that was the base of the public process that we've had, and some opportunities to really hear from the community and have all the members of these groups who volunteered a lot of time, help usher this along and help the plan really reflect the community's interests. So the process itself, kind of what we were doing in terms of products, we did a lot of existing conditions analysis at the beginning, market analysis, looking at the conditions of the streets and things like that. There was community outreach to try to get people to come to these meetings, to educate them a little bit that the process was happening, and there was a community survey that we did online. There we identified opportunities and constraints, and through this process, which is, I'm summarizing quickly, but that's about 6 months of work right there, we came up with 3 draft alternatives, and this was sort of the penultimate step in the process. We had 3 draft alternatives to show to all of these groups and to the final open house and get people's thoughts on which of these they like better, which parts of which reflected what they wanted to see. And that resulted in a final plan concept that we presented at a public meeting. Through this process, we developed a project vision statement to sort of describe what it was that this plan is going to be trying to achieve, and it's important for what comes after, so I am just going to read it now. Downtown Gladstone is a unique, lively, and accessible community center that celebrates the history of the city while accommodating the needs of residents, businesses, and visitors with a mix of uses. Portland Avenue is a successful mixed-use corridor where housing in various forms integrates harmoniously with a mix of restaurants, shops, and civic buildings, services, and gathering spaces. The corridor is a vibrant destination as well as a connection to other Gladstone neighborhoods, the Clackamas River, regional trails, natural areas, and nearby attractions outside of the city. Portland Avenue welcomes residents and visitors alike to downtown Gladstone with a unifying streetscape design and easy and safe accessibility by foot, bike, and car. So that's the vision behind the plan that we think is reflected through the recommendations that we'll be going through now. The plan itself is, we sort of have talked about it as being divided into 2 sort of major spheres. There's the recommendations for the public sphere and for the private sphere. The public sphere really means anything between sidewalk to sidewalk, the street itself, the area where the city might consider making public improvements themselves. The private sphere has to do with the property along the Portland Avenue corridor on each side. Most of this is owned by private property owners, and of course they're going to make the decisions that they want for their own property. So in order to to maybe influence or encourage what private property owners might want to do with their property. The plan has some recommendations in terms of what giving them flexibility and what might be allowed on those properties to make it a little easier to bring about some of the development that the community is hoping to see. This is sort of the high-level view of the plan concept altogether and some of the things that we'll be talking about over the next few minutes. The study area, my laser doesn't show up on the screen, but the study area is the dotted red line.
Stand up there if that'd be easier.
Yeah. The study area we looked at corresponds to the C2 zone, which is the community commercial zone. That is shown here by this red dotted line. This is the existing boundary of the C2 zone in the middle of Gladstone. This is Portland Avenue here. This is where the bridge was, and hopefully will be again. So this is what you're looking at. We are here. So as we go forward, just know that this is the study area. The planning process really focused mostly on Portland Avenue itself and properties that front onto Portland Avenue itself. There are some recommendations that deal with the whole area, and I'll specify those. And then the other important area to know is this blue dotted line, which we are calling the downtown core. That's a 4-block area that begins at Arlington Street to the south and ends at Exeter Street to the north. And so that's 4 blocks. What we've identified as the core are just those properties that actually have frontage on Portland Avenue itself. And for that area, we'll have some additional ideas and recommendations to talk about. Here's a little just sort of graphic depiction of the downtown core concept and what we might be looking at 20 years from now if the plan is successful and Gladstone starts to get the development that's envisioned in the plan. We'll be talking about all these things, but as you can see, it's lively. There's some new development. The storefronts are revitalized. There's good connections for people who are walking, biking, and driving. Parking is preserved on the sides, and so there's a few different aspects here of the whole plan. So we'll start by talking about sort of transportation and street recommendations, or what I referred to as the public sphere a moment ago. The transportation elements, through the process, we've ended up focusing in on different areas. In speaking with the community, and we were receiving feedback that while we were looking at a long stretch of Portland Avenue, not all parts of it are really created equal, and some of them have they function differently. And so the recommendations reflect that, and that the streets might be given a little different treatment through those areas. The northernmost area between Exeter and up to Abernathy, sort of up by the school, is what we term the mixed-use corridor. The idea there is that well, I'll get to that in a minute. So there's one set of recommendations for that area, the mixed-use corridor. The 4 blocks of the downtown core get a different treatment, and actually the recommendations split that again into 2 sections, which I'll show you in a minute. The northern part, the mixed-use corridor, the recommendations are to maintain the current street width, and so instead look over time to restripe the lanes on the street, consider what lanes are there, add generous bike lanes with a safety buffer, maintain the on-street parking. Sidewalks and planting strips would stay the same width they are now, but could be redeveloped over time so that the sidewalks are redeveloped and so on. So the benefits to this section is that it all operates within the current width of the street. It can be done if there's not time for full street construction, or while you look for funding for that, there's an option of just to repaint the street, restripe. You start to see some of these results in an early phase. The second section is right in the middle of the downtown core. This is a 2-block area, and this is where the ideas are a little more involved. This area between Exeter and Clarendon, where we're sitting now, the recommendation is to develop a festival street downtown, which is really aimed at establishing the downtown core as a center of activity, a center of commerce, a center of sidewalk activity and pedestrian access and events. So the idea behind the festival street is that the sidewalks are wider, and that in this case there's curbless treatment of the street itself, so that basically it creates a continuous surface. I'll show examples of this, such that you're able to really program a lot more there. You're able to do events for important community events. You can close off the street. You can have your holiday party there, your summer festival there. It really, through the treatment of the pavement and so on, it really creates a strong sense of place, and that you've arrived in the core of the downtown. So, in this case, as I said, the sidewalks are are quite a bit wider. This allows for street seating outside of restaurants and shops. It allows for much easier sort of pedestrian passage, and just a sense of that this is a shared space between vehicles and pedestrians. The next section is the 2 blocks just south of there, between Clarendon and Arlington Street. The treatment is very similar, but the difference being that those 2 blocks would actually have a curb. All the sort of the widths of the streets would be the same, but in that area it would go back to having a curb and not having the sort of the plaza treatment. Another important part about the recommendations for that 4-block section is that in that area it would be a shared street. It would be a shared street between the cars and bicycles in that area, and from the bike lanes coming down from the north, the traffic would be ushered into a shared situation. And this can seem a little different, but there are lots of examples of how this works and how to do it safely. It takes just some engineering and knowing how to mark those streets. But the effect of this, the idea is to slow things down, create a great shared environment through the 4-block core of downtown, and also ultimately through this whole area, through the bike connections, reconnect the trolley trail first down to the park, and then hopefully if the bridge can be reconstructed, then the trolley trail will continue across. As part of this project, we came up with planning level estimates of the cost of these projects. They're included here, broken down into the different sort of street sections I just spoke about. As I was stated that the mixed-use corridor to the north can be done a little bit more easily with restriping, and the curbs and sidewalks can be redeveloped over time, or it can be done all as once as a city project. The changes to the downtown core area would need to be undertaken all at once because the street would be reconstructed, and there's more expense to that because the street is because they're recommending a special treatment paving and placemaking impact for those blocks. Major part of the plan that I'm going to talk about just briefly here, but is talked about quite a bit in the plan, is that all the potential for the different streetscape elements. Because at this point we're considering adopting the plan as a guiding document, the real design decisions and streetscape decisions and these things would be coming as a part of a future process. So we don't need to spend too much time getting into specifics because that would all be part of other processes. But the types of things that are involved in redoing your streets are things like the sidewalks, the seating, creating stormwater, landscaping, bioswales, curb extensions at the intersections, crosswalk markings, pavement textures, plaza space, street furniture, street art, street lighting, and I have just a few examples of these types of things that we're talking about, of what the city might do through the design process. This is an example of a shared street, like I was talking about. You see that the bikes are ushered onto the street itself. Again, there are lots of examples of this. It usually catches people's attention, but it does work there. And the effect of it is really to make it, the name says it all. It's about making it a shared street, making it safe for everyone, slowing down traffic so that that particular section of Lower Portland Avenue isn't just a throughway. These are examples of a curbless street, sort of like I was talking about. The upper example is not as wide as Portland Avenue is, but that's the idea, is that the entire street here is of a single surface. In this case, it's been closed down for a community event. People get to share all that space, but then also you'll notice that there are bollards on each side. That helps define the space for when it's not closed down, and cars know how to. It shows cars where to go, where to park, and so on, and it really ends up working quite well. The example down in the lower right is from Sherwood, so it's nearby, and they've done much of their downtown area and around their civic buildings with this type of approach. They've chosen a common blue color as sort of a defining element, so they've got new street lights, new street art, again, the flat plaza treatment, and they do a lot of events down there, and it really makes for an interesting civic heart to the town if you haven't been down there. Here's some examples of some wider sidewalks and just what's possible. You see it adds some vitality, gives room for seating and for the some of the public spaces, or I'm sorry, the private spaces to come out and join the public space. And also an example of what you can do with stormwater treatment, how you can actually treat it as a design feature to make the whole thing, really look nice. And so that's just some options of what you'd be able to consider. Banners and art are very common. Picking new ornamental streetlights is very common on a main street. Some sort of banner art to unify the whole street and make it look as a single place. So those are just a few examples I wanted to include. We talked a lot more during this process about all these all the options that were available, and Sarah Architects did a good job of presenting those. Another element is the gateway locations. There are recommendations on this in the plan. It's not hard and fast. This is an element that might change going forward. But the idea here is just that Portland Avenue has certain areas, certain intersections where people are coming into Portland Avenue, and the idea is to get gateway, some kind of gateway elements or markers or something to indicate that this is a special place and that you've arrived there. So common things to do that are signage and art, arches and things like that are a little more. You don't need to go quite to that expense or effort. Even there are easy ways with signs and banners and so on to announce that Portland Avenue is the downtown. That is Gladstone's heart of downtown. Here's using the intersection itself. The paving is sort of a gateway, and then finally just signage and wayfinding. One of the things we've discussed through the process is the importance of just making sure that people know where Portland Avenue is if they're coming down McLaughlin or if they're on the freeway, knowing that this area is here and that this is actually the heart of the town. So in terms of public parking solutions, we went back, we talked about the existing 2006 parking plan. A lot of work and effort went into that, and so taking that as a base, we've basically there's a recommendation in the plan that that the 2006 parking plan be implemented. Not all of it has been. So here, the red area is called Zone A. There was a recommendation in that parking plan to do a 4-hour parking limit in that area, and the downtown plan recommends that that be considered again. The reason for that is that a parking limit really helps that the parking just in this key area be focused on customers and visitors, and not necessarily be used by employees or people who are staying all day. And so this just recommends doing that on Portland Avenue itself. Parking off to either side would still be available. Zone B, the blue area, there's no limit, no parking limits recommended for that. And another important recommendation of the plan is that going forward that some location for a public parking lot be explored in this area if the opportunity becomes available, and then that would provide a permanent source of public parking for customers and people coming to the downtown. In terms of the private sphere, so this was the other part of the plan we were discussing, and this was the idea here was twofold. One is that part of the impetus at the outset of the project that was identified was that current zoning codes might be either confusing or inadequate, and it's actually preventing some development from happening in the C2 zone. And so part of this process was to go back and do a couple different things. We did a code audit, Angelo Planning did, looking at the development code itself, trying to identify what issues there might be. We also did some site studies of sort of hypothetical development programs in the area to identify what problems developers might be running into in making projects happen. And the whole idea here was to look at to really look at the types of land uses that are technically already allowed in the development code and figure out why those aren't happening. Not to, really not to make recommendations for wildly new kinds of development, but just look at why what is already allowed in the code is not taking place. And so, coming out of that, there are sort of three categories of land use recommendations in the plan. These are, again, things that these all qualify as elements that would not be adopted through this process. These are recommendations to consider in the future. So adopting this plan now into the comp plan does not put these immediately into effect. But these are the recommendations that we've formed based on the process and our discussion with the community, and also sort of our expertise looking at the issues of development. So to summarize, the first goal of the land use recommendations is to encourage new development within the existing limits of scale, meaning the existing limits in the current zoning. Goal 2 was to clarify and improve standards for residential development, and Goal 3 was to enhance design standards for commercial development. So under Goal 1, the idea was to encourage new development within the existing limits. So really getting at that question of why some of it isn't happening now. And there were some major issues that were identified through this process. And this was also part of the plan that definitely spurred the most discussion and debate. And we know that there have been concerns about it that we'll be talking about tonight. But the basic outline of the recommendations are to maintain the existing height limit, which is 3 stories or 35 feet. That's what is currently allowed, and there's some surprise to that because there aren't a lot of 3-story buildings right now along Portland Avenue, but that is your current limit. Then, in order to, the next 2 are really aimed at trying to allow a little more development to happen on sites so that the development can pencil out a little better for developers. And the reason, basically the recommendations come down to reducing minimum landscaping requirements and setbacks to just allow programming to be a little bit better on some of these sites, and then to reduce the minimum parking requirements. And I'll get into the specifics of that. I know people are interested in that. So in terms of parking requirements, we looked at what's required now. We compared it to sort of best practices and what other communities are requiring for their new development. And so the plan recommends changes in both the C2 zone and the downtown core. One change is that for commercial space, currently there's 1 parking space required per 300 or 370 square feet, depending on where you are. And we recommend that be changed to 1 space per 600 square feet. And also that currently there's 1.5 parking spaces required per residential unit, and the recommendation is to reduce that to requiring 1 space per unit throughout the C2 zone, and down to 0.5 spaces per unit in the downtown core. So those are the recommendations presented in the plan, and I wanted to show an example that we've been using from the site studies that we did, just to try to illustrate why we spent so much time on this and discussing it, and where the recommendation is coming from. This is an example of development on a 10,000 square foot site. The specific site isn't necessarily important. These were supposed to sort of be hypothetical development programs to show what could be done. And under the current zoning code, we found that the most likely the most likely form of commercial development on this site would be a one-story building, taking up less than half the site. You get about 4,000 square feet of retail development, and the requirement is for 8 spaces. You can provide up to 16 spaces, but this is more of what would be feasible under current conditions. So then we looked at just what would it take then to do just a little bit more. This is just a 2-story building with some office space above the retail space, and this making this change to get a building just at 2 stories, suddenly the parking requirement jumps to 21 spaces, and that suddenly makes it very difficult to get this to work. And so there's what's feasible to provide is less than 21, obviously, and then through our recommendations, the recommendations in the plan would be to reduce that to 15 spaces and count on-street parking, and then suddenly it becomes more feasible to do this type of development. And I don't want to overstate this particular project, but the point I'm trying to get across is that when we looked at this, you might be surprised that even rather modest sort of 2-story development becomes very hard to do because of some of the current requirements. The second sort of subset or goals of the land use recommendations were to clarify and improve standards for residential development in the currently, residential is only allowed as a conditional use, and the standards that apply to conditional residential in the C2 are the same as you would apply in the R5 zone, which is a low-density residential zone. So basically what's happening is not only is residential not allowed outright, but when it is allowed, you're applying standards for low-density residential zones, which is basically not going to get you the kind of little housing variety that you would expect on a main street. It's it's really going to be aimed at getting you single-family homes. And so the recommendations on that, improving the standards for residential development, would be that in the downtown core, those 4 blocks, to not allow residential on the ground floor. This would encourage mixed-use development. Again, that's on the properties fronting onto Portland Avenue. It's not the properties, off the block. The idea there is just for new development to have, to encourage it to be commercial at least on the ground floor, but then allow residential above that. This is I should specify this is for new development. This isn't putting new requirements on people who own existing buildings. These recommendations would not force any changes to people who are grandfathered in, essentially. In the C2 zone, we recommend that that the city permit residential outright instead of being a conditional use. Reduce minimum front setbacks from 20 feet to 5 feet. The reason for that is that if someone were to come onto Portland Avenue and build a new residential property right now, they're basically required to have the setback that you would normally associate with like a front lawn. If somebody wanted to build, apartments or townhomes or something up against Portland Avenue, obviously being required to have a full 20-foot setback doesn't match with that style. But to make sure that the community gets the styles and quality that they want, we recommend you establish design standards for ground floor residential that's close to the sidewalk. And finally, next slide. Goal 3 is to enhance the design standards for new commercial development. Again, this is not this would not put requirements on existing property owners. This is about new development, but it would prohibit new drive-through uses. So when you're trying to establish a sort of a downtown Main Street pedestrian zone, a more active street, drive-through uses are not ideal for that. McLaughlin is ideal for that. So this would prohibit new drive-throughs. It requires more windows on the ground floor of commercial. This helps establish a classic sort of storefront character that we associate sometimes with older types of buildings. Currently, the code requires that 25% of the floor, the ground floor area, be glass, and this would raise that that requirement. And finally, clarify a requirement for the location of the main entrance, and that's a sort of a small technical detail, but it helps also again establish a storefront character by making sure the entrance is on the corner or in a prominent location. This is just a quick example of storefront improvement before and after, the kind of things that architects think about, but really shows what can be done when the revitalization takes hold and with the code that encourages it. There's also a recommendation in the plan and the implementation strategies to do a storefront improvement program, which is also why I've included a slide here. So those are the recommendations for the private and public sphere. That's an overview again of there's a lot of detail in the plan itself, which we'd be happy to answer questions about. The plan ends with implementation recommendations. Other than adopting it as part of the comp plan, these are all recommendations that the community might consider in the future. So those are the policy actions, undertaking the transportation projects the plan describes. There's some economic development strategies which talk about how to build the business environment in the downtown, and also considering the storefront improvement program, perhaps through your urban renewal program. And so to consider using urban renewal is one of the recommendations to help move this plan forward, and also to keep working on concurrent public projects such as the future of the City Hall, working with partners on rebuilding the bridge, all these things that are important local and regional projects. So, thank you for your patience. I wanted to. It's again a complex document with a lot in it, and it does take a while to get through. And so, I'm happy to answer any questions now or later. Thank you.
You want to do the public before us?
Yeah. Let's get through all that. I think right now we're going to take, does anybody else want to speak about the plan specifically, or have a presentation? Otherwise, I'd like to have the public speak, and then we could have you come back and we could ask you some questions. I want to get some testimony from the public.
Sure.
About what they're thinking. That sound good? I already opened the hearing.
Okay.
So that's part of the hearing. It's an informal type of hearing.
We do have Susan already.
Susan, do you want to read your letter?
What I would like to do, if it's okay, I would like to ask a clarification question first.
Sure, come on.
And then I can read my letter later if you'd like. I found an error in my thinking just from going through the presentation tonight, and I appreciated that. before, if you remember when the Olson development project came before planning, okay, we were told if we didn't get our name on the list that night, we couldn't address it later on. I could have been unintentionally putting out incorrect information, because I was thinking that this process, which people helped me to understand, and it took quite a long time to get. I know that it goes to city council and then it can come back. What I'm asking is, do we need to have our name before you tonight if code changes related to this would come before you at a later date?
No.
Thank you. You've clarified my question.
But tonight, this is a public hearing, and if you, that gives some rights to everybody that's here that is a party to this hearing.
Right.
So in other words, if you wanted to ask that this hearing be continued to another date and time, you could do that.
Okay.
So you'd have to be here tonight, correct?
Well, you can always request it in writing as well, but yes. Yeah, the participation piece, if I think I understand your question, is less formal than it would be in your traditional setting.
So what's before us tonight is to look, to go through this, and it's, you saw it, I think, right?
Right.
And it's, there's a lot of stuff in there, and, honestly, some of us, myself, I've been to a few of the meetings, but to go through this was a huge task, and I probably absorbed that much of that.
Right.
So I think, what we're hoping to do is go through some of these things tonight and discuss and make recommendations on some of that.
Okay. I can proceed with information from my letter then, if you would like.
It's up to you.
Okay.
Your letter is going to be part of the record. I thought you might want to read it. It's up to
Okay.
you. You don't have to. It'll be in the record one way or the other.
Just very quickly, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, okay? However, I have concerns about Jenny Lipscomb's management at points of this project, and also her business relationship with Ross Schultz, who was an interim whatever. Okay. The other thing that I was concerned about are some of the codes that are being changed have more of an impact on people who are living. The closer you are to Portland Avenue, the more this is going to impact you. And when I looked at the public survey, the online survey that was taken, the data that was shown there did not match up with what is shown in this plan. As far as building, most people wanted 2 stories for starts. Secondly, most people on Portland Avenue said people came to their businesses by car. And one of the big concerns overall in the city of Gladstone is that people parking in front of their houses. So parking is a big issue in this town already. And then so I don't feel that everybody's viewpoint has necessarily been reflected equally in this plan. I'm not blaming anyone, I'm just saying that's a concern of mine. The other thing is taking the time. I haven't had time to read and fully comprehend this, and I have been to quite a few meetings. So whether I see some positive things, I can see some negative things, I think it would take time to really go through. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Susan. Does anybody else want to speak at this point about the plan, opposition to it, or Bill?
Okay, something real quick, just kind of touching on what Susan did. Bill Osborne. The parking thing is really, when I look at it, one of the big things I think a lot of people have issues with. Commercial property businesses, you have people revolving in and out of there. So dropping the requirements for commercial, I could definitely get on board with that. For the residential, people are going to be there, and the fact is this isn't Portland. We don't take the bus everywhere because it's not convenient out here. When you're in Portland, it's convenient to hop on a bus, and there's a lot of people there that don't have cars and apartments. So that's one of the concerns that I have, is just the reduction of the parking requirements on the residential, because I think that's going to cause issues. And I would say anybody who questions that, I would say drive down to Selwood, look where they have the 3-story buildings they're putting in there right up on the street, how they've changed around their parking, and try to find a parking spot within 5 or 6 blocks of one of those places or further. And then knock on a few doors of some of the peoples in those neighborhoods and see how it's impacted them, and those places aren't even full. So that's really the only thing I'm really opposing on the downtown revitalization program, is the parking. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Hi there.
Hi.
Do you want me to say my name or?
Yeah, please.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Stacy Moncrief. I live on Portland Avenue across from the post office. And I was part of the stakeholders meeting. I own a home there. I'm not a business owner. I'm totally in support of the plan. I love Gladstone. I moved here 12 years ago. I have 2 children that go to the school here, and I am really hoping to see Gladstone grow and become that vision. Everything in that vision statement is spot on to what I want to see for Gladstone. And if we don't change some of the codes, and if we don't do some of the recommendations, it will never change. We will have a dying town that nobody wants to come to. I want it to have the restaurants and the shops and the places we can walk to. I want to stay in Gladstone. I want my children to grow up here. I don't want to leave. But it's not living up to its potential. And if we don't change some of those codes, like they said, businesses, development, they're not going to come. Nothing is going to change. We're still going to be too many of the same businesses that don't bring anybody here. We deserve to be something like Oregon City, or Selwood, for that matter, or Sherwood. All those places that are growing their towns. Yes, it'll bring some parking challenges. I have parking challenges in front of my house, but I'll take that. I'd rather have a little bit of challenge parking and have the beautiful city, the beautiful town, and the opportunity to shop within my town and eat and go out to eat and to mingle and live with my neighbors. Right now there just isn't much opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I hate talking in front of people.
That's all right. We're
my name is Trisha Combs, and we just live up on Dartmouth, and we're kind of new to Gladstone. I've grown up in Oregon. I grew up in Hillsboro, Aloha, Helvetia area, and I saw the mess growing up there. It's a very rural community, and I saw the mess without having any plans in place of what was happening and how it's just destroyed it until that Orenco project came into place. And we lived in Damascus. I also have owned properties in northeast Portland off Alberta. We worked really hard with a group called Hope and Hard Work. And the community of that was based on the people who bought homes in the 70s and 80s before everything went a mess, and they wanted to bring that culture in, and the restaurants and the revitalization to bring the neighborhood back. And we had been mostly recently living in Oregon City. I have 2 teenage boys, and we moved to Gladstone because we saw the potential of what could be happening with Oregon City as us partnering up with them with the bike path and the community, and we moved here because of the potential that we saw, honestly, with Portland Boulevard. So I was devastated to find out that people are against it. So parking will obviously affect our house because we're just right up here in Dartmouth, but having lived in those northeast communities where it was the same issue. We had parking, we had things going on, but you know, we were bringing shops in, and people are talking about money coming from outside, but what I saw was a lot of like local artists and bakers and chefs and people opening up restaurants. Maybe they were renting those spaces, but it was bringing money
into the community, and it gave us a place to go. I mean, right now when I go out with my kids, we go to Oregon City or we go to Portland. We don't stay here in Gladstone, so we're for it. My husband and I are both here. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Linda Cosgrove, and I live on Dartmouth, and I would like to see Portland Avenue cleaned up. I am for improvements. But I have some concerns. I submitted a letter.
Thank you. Just going to ask you to do that.
I submitted a letter to Tammy today, and it is regarding parking. We don't want overflow parking coming into the neighborhoods. When I've been talking to people, that's a huge concern of theirs, is the overflow parking. Another concern is the 3-story construction. It doesn't fit into the neighborhood. People are more acceptant of the 2-story parking with adequate parking. And there was a survey taken at the beginning of this, and it certainly wasn't followed because people had concerns again about the parking and the 3-story construction. And I don't think the people on East Dartmouth from Portland Avenue have been notified that they might not be able to park in front of their houses. I seriously doubt that they have a clue as to what's going on if that is changed to 4-hour parking. And with the extension of the multi-use corridor, that brings in duplexes into the community again. And there was a campaign some years ago to stop more duplexes from coming in to make it residential. And as far as a business district of Portland Avenue, I just don't, a retail shopping area of Portland Avenue, I don't think that's realistic. If you'll look at the evening news, shops are closing down everywhere and people are going to online shopping because it's just cheaper, and I don't think the stores on Portland Avenue are going to be able to compete with online shopping. And if you go into Milwaukee, they have about 3 blocks that's dedicated to Dark Horse Comics, and they're not open to the public. That's entirely offices. And I think that offices are the backbone of Portland Avenue, and I don't think there should be any reason to try to ban them or close them out and say strictly retail. And as far as creating density, our city has created density. We have the new Webster Road apartments, and people are still moving in. There's a plan up at Somerset Retirement Center. I have no idea what the schedule is, but they'll be bringing more population in. So we are creating density, and there isn't a law that says that we have to create more. And the last was, I was surprised to see that the library is out 5 years. The last time I heard it was out two years. You know, people have been trying to build a library since 1979. It should be the first new construction to go up any place in the city, regardless of where they put it. And it seems like the library is always the last consideration. There's always something else that comes first. And that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Everett. I live here in Gladstone. I also own a business just down the street. I've been there in that business almost 30 years. What have I seen done on Gladstone? Literally nothing. I've seen the streets deteriorate. I've seen the sidewalks deteriorate. I've seen really literally nothing. However, what I have seen are small little businesses opening down there. Whether it's a comic book store, whether it's Sandal Lake, they've improved. It looks like they're going to maybe do something else in the one building down there. I disagree. I think that small businesses and small little mom and pop stores are very much at the heart of what people want, and that's what I'd love to see here. And I've always wanted to see it here. I've always wanted to see restaurants here. I love the concept I loved being able to go out, sit outside, have a nice meal, have some, I don't know, I'm just excited by a possibility of this plan. Just being here so many years and seeing nothing. Now, I understand parking will be an issue. Luckily for me, it won't. I have a parking lot. But then again, I've always wanted to change my building a little bit. I wanted to alter some things a little bit too, because that's what, I'm a businessman. That's what I do. I own property too. I mean, I own that property, that's it. And anyway, I'm excited about this prospect. I've been to a lot of the meetings. I disagree. I think 3 stories would be very good. I'm in favor of 3 stories. And right now it's zoned anyway for 3 stories. It's just that it doesn't really pencil out overall for most people. So anyway, I'm in favor of it. And I hope we will see most of that plan sort of go through. I don't expect it all. I'm sure the council will tend to change it. But hopefully we'll see most of that go through at some time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thank you. Ms. Bannock has some cards as well.
They've already spoken.
Okay.
Hi. Hi. Anthony Riley, local resident here. I thought they did an excellent job on the plan. It's an exciting vision for the city. I do a lot of these mixed-use projects all over Portland. Work with a few developers, and I've done some with no parking. But most of them with the mixed use, I see that they go 1 floor under street level, and they put parking, and that seems to be a really good fix you might consider. I don't think it's the 2-story limit. I get it, if you lived a block away. I've seen them go up and felt sorry for the people that 4 stories went up right in front of their house. But I don't think I don't see any of the developers going. I mean, it just doesn't pencil out for them to go less than 3 stories. You get down to 2 stories, they're just not doing it. So it has to be, attractive to development coming in, obviously, or otherwise we just get a wider street and prettier sidewalks, without the buildings going in. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
My name is Deanne Henson. I live on East Clarendon, and I moved here a year ago from New Orleans, Louisiana. And I think there are many things that I've been exposed to with revitalization, especially after Katrina. I raised my children in the French Quarter, where we have so many things that are important to the residents. But I showed up here tonight because I was concerned about the actual cost of something like this, the revitalization. And I didn't see a lot of that covered in, in detail. One of the things that, in living in the French Quarter, the way that costs were divided up were the businesses were always favored. Property owners were made to bear the brunt or the cost of certain things. So there's going to be cost with a project like this, and I would like to know how that's going to, affect the property owners, people who, even live. And I guess what I'm trying to say is renters are one thing, owners are another, then you've got business owners, and so I was just curious how that cost is going to, be brought to bear on, on each segment, if one was going to be more responsible than the other. The other is, how would you enforce that 4-hour parking time frame? I know that in New Orleans, we had meter maids that were very difficult. And then the other thing that I didn't hear about, but one thing that I had thought about was maybe if there was space at the end of the street somewhere where you could provide a parking area so that you could keep the parking issue maybe something that would not be so, it would be easier on the residents, because it's hard to want to park in front of your home and you can't when everybody else thinks they have the right to do that. And so I'd like to, since I've lived here over the last year, you know, I live on East Clarendon, where there obviously was a business that was grandfathered in some form, and I don't choose to pick fights with my neighbors or anything like that, but I'd like to see better code enforcement if we're going to, you know, if you all are going to go forward with this plan, you know, make it a little more consistent for the, you know, for the residents. So I think it's wonderful that you want to revitalize. I think it needs to be cost effective for the people who live here. I don't think that we should have, you know, all the costs thrown at one time, but it should be really as much public information. So that's why I shut up, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
I'm Tracy Prentice Todd, and I'm a business owner, and I have a business in the 100 block of Gloucester, West Gloucester. I also live in the 100 block of West Hereford for almost my full 47 years. I've lived in the downtown area. I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I think people want to have places to shop. I spent probably the first 2 weekends after Thanksgiving on Main Street in Oregon City shopping, and really going, why can't we have this? Why can't we have just this nice community retail space and a place to stop and have food, and watching the bicyclists go by and parking their bikes and going in for a pint and coming out, and it's just, I'm really excited. I think that they've done a great job, and I was at the meetings, and I feel like we were expressed, our ideas came through. So just want to say that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We get everybody?
The cards that I received, yes, have spoken.
Okay. So we didn't do the cards because we want to be informal, and thank you for filling those out anyway, because that's what we normally do. So, commissioners...
Let's let them reply to what's been said, and then
Sure.
we can follow up with our questions.
Do you guys want to respond?
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. I think there's a lot there, and so a few things jumped out at me that I'll respond to, and Darcy may as well. And but if we miss anything, any particular points you want us to hit, please let us know. First of all, Susan made a very good point that with this plan, or with any revitalization, the closer someone is to Portland Avenue, the greater the impact is likely to be. And I think that that's obviously true. If the city is able to implement the plan, and these types of changes occur, there will be changes on Portland Avenue, and those changes will be apparent to people who visit. They'll be apparent to people who live nearby, people who have businesses here, across the board. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, and I think that just all the comments taken together sort of encapsulate a lot of the discussion that the community had throughout this process about that it is about trade-offs, and there are some things that the community would like to see and to achieve, and then there are other areas where we felt that through this study we've identified things such as parking where in order to perhaps achieve this vision, you're looking at maybe having to do a little bit of sacrifice in a different way. and that is true. There are trade-offs. So we certainly acknowledge that the parking requirements I went over. I won't detail them again. We do know that's a concern. Part of what we've discussed is that successful Main Street areas, including many that you can find here in the metro area, are busy. There are people there. People want to come there, and that's part of the deal. So, we've said in the meetings and as we've discussed this, that sometimes a little parking congestion is a nice thing to have. Means you've arrived, right? I mean, it's not a nice thing to have. I understand that nobody enjoys looking for parking, but you see what I mean. It's a problem that can be an indicator of other successes. But the parking recommendations in the plan are what they are, and we understand that there's been concerns, and we do want to emphasize that this discussion has happened through the process, and we certainly hope that everyone feels like they have at least been listened to through the process, even if not all the, some of these things being weighed. Some of them have ended up in the plan and some have not, but I certainly hope that everyone knows that they've been listened to through this process. Did you have?
Yeah, just a couple other observations about parking, because it is so troublesome to the community, definitely, and that is something that we've heard from day one, that was a concern, that there's definitely people have voiced opinions about there being parking problems now. Obviously, when you did your parking plan back in 2006, that was prompted because there was a concern about not having enough available parking. So there's a history of that in this community, and it was definitely identified as part of the survey, the initial survey that was done at the beginning of the project. Again, it's a little bit challenging because part of that survey, the top thing that people really wanted to see were more or different businesses. Right, and so again, those type of activities, people get here, as was said earlier, people get here mostly by car. That's likely not going to change too much in the future. I mean, having better facilities for bicyclists, having more people will get you more transit eventually. So things may change in your mode, but nobody's expecting the car to be, obsolete anytime soon. So in that response, in those survey responses, again, the top one was more different businesses, more events, more improvements along the corridor. All those really scored really high, and the things in the survey that did not score as well were new buildings that are 3 or more stories tall, right? So that was towards the bottom of the list, but even then, 52% of the people either supported or were neutral on that. 48% said, no, we don't like that. We don't want 3 or more stories. We didn't say 3, we said 3 or more. So again, it was hard to parse that question. It was not worded well enough for us to kind of figure out, was it 3 stories or was it really 4 stories? And we did hear through the course of the project, 4 stories was definitely out of scale with the community. Again, other town centers in the metro area are achieving those type of densities. You're seeing that type of building. Gladstone residents are not in favor of that, and our participants clearly pointed that out. So I wanted to point that in. And the other thing that we may have not stressed enough as part of sort of our reconnaissance, our existing conditions, looking at the code, what we realized was, in getting to know this community, is that, your lots are pretty small. They're mostly built on. So the opportunities for development and growth in this community really is going to be more about redevelopment, and realizing that your envelopes, your spaces for redevelopment were already pretty small. What could you tweak within those blocks, within those boxes that are your platted lots, that would make any bit of difference? And parking really does. Parking takes up a lot of land, and it's land that could otherwise be developed with uses. So that was just one of those pieces of trying to fit on the landscape, the type of development that and activities that people said they wanted to see. So that was the exercise, and parking is one of those linchpin kind of tweaks that you can make to help actually realize some of the types of uses that folks said that they would like to see in the future.
Questions, commissioners?
Can you go ahead and address her concern regarding the burden of funding?
Yes. So Deanne asked about the cost of the plan. Really, the major costs identified and that we tried to quantify on sort of a planning level are the actual transportation improvements to the street and sidewalks. And that was the slide that I had up there. And so again, this is a project that involves possibly some recommended public projects and some projects on private property. So, but it does not identify definitively how the sources of funding for the public projects. It talks about the possibility of considering expanding your existing urban renewal area to cover all of Portland Avenue in order to pay for some of these projects. And it does not those estimates do not include things like street art. It did include an estimate for sort of new ornamental street lighting. But there would be possibly some extra things you might want, like art or furniture or so on, that not included in those estimates. But again, that's in the plan. The total was basically $5.5 million, and as mentioned, the costs, depending on what part of the street you're talking about, differs. Yes, there's a more detailed table found in Appendix D. Appendix D on street improvements, Table 2. Or is it C?
Oh, I apologize. It's C, actually. Yeah.
Yes, Appendix C. Yeah, so the short answer is we don't know how those would be funded. They would be funded through mostly existing C mechanisms, so to the extent that those mechanisms affect property owners more so than businesses and so on, it would have the same effect as on any city project, I guess, is the answer.
Is it okay with you guys if the public asks questions too? Why don't you come up and
you need to come up so that we can get you on the microphone for when they do the transcribing.
Well, okay, so here's the thing that I'm concerned about, and that is I was married to a community banker for over 25 years. So that's something that I lived with, and the way that the costs are handed down to people are really important to me. And I've noticed since I've been here, I don't know what the average age of a person is that lives in Gladstone. I will say the reason why I ended up in Gladstone was because I have a 70-pound dog where nobody would rent to me. I ultimately had to find a home very fast last year, and then it snowed. And so that's how I came to be here in Gladstone. But it is important as you piece that out to people, how are you going to inform, or how will the public be informed of how that's going to be, funded, and how that will affect maybe our taxes.
So I think maybe David, you could probably address that best, right? How people are notified based on different funding. And
well, I think it's really important to note, and I think this was mentioned, Brendan, right? Brendan mentioned this, that there's really not going to be one. This is not something that's going to be, let's invest, at least as I understand the plan, $200 million and do this in 2 years. It's going to be very it's going to happen over time, and it'll happen with redevelopment. There would be certain a lot of this could be where you have now new standards that would be in place that may encourage different types of businesses, or at least different types of developments that would come in. Maybe it's going to be something like the impetus to do a 3-story building, and that would trigger certain requirements for that development to do different things, different street improvements. So you'd have this plan that would say, okay, well, when those things happen, here's what we want. It's very often that you have developers that have to do some amount of public improvements. And in this case, it might be that you're going to have some special standards that would apply in this area. So that's one way. There certainly could be, and there would be notice that would accompany generally all of those types of applications. So if someone comes in and they want to, either remodel an existing building or knock it down and put in a new one, I think it's a 300 to 500 foot radius around that property people would get notice of that.
So there's really no budget yet because this hasn't been approved, and so basically we're just out here.
Well, and it's not one project.
So what we're trying to do is update the comprehensive plan to say this is what we want to do. These are the kind of things we want to do. So what our job is tonight as commissioners is to come up with a plan that we think is going to work for the city based on everybody's input. And then there's a long process of doing the code things and all this stuff. In the interim, there's grants that could be got. I would like to see a $10 million grant, and then some of the things that we want to do, we could say we're going to have a public hearing and see if we can do that. We're going to change the code and do all this stuff and have the money to do it. But, all the funding and stuff is still not defined for any particular thing at all.
Well, I think in my closing remarks here tonight, first of all, thank you very much for taking this on. I think it's wonderful, and I do think that since my time over the last year I've been in Portland, I've seen an outflow of people not wanting to remain there, so they're looking to go other places. And with this project, there are a lot of millennials, my children being some of those, but I think it would be very helpful to entice those little entrepreneurs to come in and be those small shops, because I think that's really what will keep a community functioning. So I think it's great. I'm happy to pay my taxes. I'm not complaining. I'm just and thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I like the project.
Sure. Anybody have any issue with that? I don't.
No, not at all. Come sit. State your name.
Andra Langston, resident in Gladstone. My background is construction. Right now I'm building a multifamily construction apartment in Hillsborough, and like you were saying, it's not uncommon for those municipalities to have those developments absorb those costs to make changes. So for instance, on my project, we're right across the street from a park, and part of our development, we had to replace those lights on the park side, even though it had nothing to do with the project. We had to do a bioswale remediation that was, they said our displaced water would hit that swell, so we had to go down there and change it. So I just want people to understand that there is some portion of these upgrades that would occur by the development. So
probably a substantial portion would be
exactly.
On the developers.
Yeah. That goes for sidewalks, curbs, all kinds
driveway
of
approaches, everything.
Exactly.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bob Everett again. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name again. I heard it, and I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm not great at that all the time. But she mentioned about sort of the demographics of the city. I can honestly say that for me, in my practice, I've had more young families come in the last 2 years than I had probably in the last 10 years before. The families are coming here because they like this community. I mean, these are young families with kids of all age ranges. They love the community. They love the schools. They love the possibility of what can happen within this city. And, of course, they see the growth. They see what's happening in Oregon City, and they're hoping, really, I've talked to a lot of them, that spreads over into here. So sometimes I think we think this city, I hear this sometimes said that this city is dying or that it's doing this or it's not. I don't believe that. I honestly don't believe that. I don't see that in my practice now. I felt that way, as I say, 6 years ago during the recession, 5-6 years ago. I don't feel that anymore. I really don't. I feel a vibrancy and a renewed sort of optimism all the way around. So that's
Great.
how I feel.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I do have a question for you. On the, let's see, it's hard to tell because you got these multiple pages. One of them is labeled page 27 under the downtown vision. And you're talking about the downtown core from Exeter to Clarendon. And you mentioned that you were going to have these curb extensions on a curbless street. And I'm just wondering, can you explain how you combine those?
Yes. It's a good question. So I think that curb extensions were included, especially in the core area. The idea, I'm sure you've all seen curb extensions in different places. The idea is you shorten the walking distance a little bit in the crosswalk. Cars tend to slow down as they approach curb bubbles. So basically, in that 2-block area where it's curbless, you're talking about almost pavement treatment to indicate that there's a bubble there, or that the standing area for the pedestrian extends a little bit. It would be probably at grade, but then if there are bollards or something, you just put them a little further out to make it clear that there's a bubble there.
I do have a question here.
Go ahead.
Brendan, you talked about the extending the urban growth boundary in the core area. I think you talked about that to include the buildings. So could you explain that a little bit? How would that happen, and what would that provide? I mean,
I'm sorry, the
urban renewal.
I'm sorry, what did I say? Yeah,
oh, the urban renewal.
I'm sorry, urban renewal,
yeah.
That's half right.
So currently, I don't believe I have the map in my materials right now, but currently you have an urban renewal agency and an urban renewal area in Gladstone, and I believe that it extends down Portland Avenue, not all the way to Arlington.
It ended at Abernathy, if I remember right.
Does it end at Abernathy?
Is that right? Does anybody remember?
I don't know.
Current boundary?
Yeah, for the urban renewal district, I think it went from Arlington up to...
Well, what I'm getting at is not that particular. It started out, basically now it's just public right-of-way and it's public buildings, and what you're asking to do is include the buildings, the private buildings along there. So
right.
That's what I'm asking, is why do that?
Yeah, so the reason that came up specifically is because for the urban renewal area to expend any funds on any projects, it has to be in the area. And so one of the recommendations was for a storefront improvement program. And this is really sort of a beautification, and just to give the property owners a small grant or a little help to encourage redoing the facades of buildings. And so you have to actively include those properties in the urban renewal area in order to do the storefront improvement.
But in the end, it's property taxes that will be going to if you allow them the money, it will be property taxes.
If you were to do that, yes.
So you'd be giving them property taxes that could be used somewhere else, is what I'm saying, to beautify their storefronts.
Yes. the idea behind those types of programs is that it's the public face that's facing the public corridor, and so the community might want to help a little bit
we're facing things in Gladstone. We want to do a lot of things, and we have a lot of infrastructure that's going bad. So the use of our property taxes is kind of a touchy issue right now.
Sure.
Just to be clear, though, I mean, putting property within the urban renewal boundary to the extent you can, there's a limit on how far you can expand it and how much.
3% per year, I think.
Well, but it can only be 20% than the original footprint overall.
Right.
So, no matter how many times you do the minors, it doesn't change the taxes per se on the property. I think that's one thing that people often, it doesn't increase them.
I'm saying the allocation of the money.
The allocation is different, right? And it would you're right. But it also, what you'd spend it on is then going to be at the discretion of the city council, essentially the urban renewal agency board, and it can absolutely go to infrastructure. I mean, that's really one of the main things that oftentimes
they use urban renewal.
Try to do this. Basically, let's improve a streetscape, let's improve sidewalks to generate the goal, to generate investment. Private investment.
So I had another one for you. In the section you have policy recommendations under the economy. So on page 3 of 4, if that means anything. It says the development of the proposed Clackamas Town Center. Is there a new Clackamas Town Center? I'm not aware of.
That's a typo.
From the original 1979 comprehensive plan. So the language in there are changes to the old comprehensive plan. So when it refers to the new Clackamas Town Center, it was new back then.
Yes.
You're amending a document that is almost 40 years old.
Oh, that's kind of sad.
I do have another
Glad
question
you were
about-
here to answer that.
I have a question about parking. You talked about the core area, the 4 hours. There's different, I mean, I've got in through your book everywhere down to 90 minutes, suggestions, not, but what you said there was 4 hours. How's that going to work with homes that are on those streets that have no driveway? There's a couple of them on Portland Ave that don't have a driveway. They're going to be in that core area. How is that going to work with 4-hour parking in front of their home? And it actually looks to me, if from the picture, it extends all the way down Dartmouth and Exeter, 1 block, which is a lot of residential on that too.
One of the things they do in the city of Portland is they have permit parking for owners. It'll say 2 hours except by permit for whatever the zones, and they zone them off. So we could protect property owners, I think, in that sense.
Especially in Northwest Portland,
Yes.
because there's no driveways at all on a lot of off of 23rd.
I think it's a question that you would have to consider and I think solve and kind of work out in the future. Basically, someone mentioned that yes, that extending where that zone A kind of extends off 1 block to the east. That yes, that probably goes right in front of people's homes, and so you probably want to consider
also the combination
modifying that
in the core area, 0.5 per unit. So if they built apartments above there, it said that the on-street parking in the front can be counted as part of their. How can that be counted when it's like a 4-hour time limit, but now you can count that as a parking space? How does that relate?
You're talking about the on-street parking.
Yes, well, it's actually counted as part of the off-street parking.
Up to 25%,
Up to yes. So how does that relate when those parking spots are 4-hour parking during the day or business hours?
That's something I was wondering too.
Yeah.
Need some clarification on that.
Yeah.
How does that work?
But is it for commercial? I don't believe it is for residential also, correct?
For the, I'm sorry, for the production.
For counting the on-street, that's for the commercial side, not for the residential.
I think it's both.
Is that both?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely commercial, but I have to check that.
And actually, along those lines, so we did have Dennis's plan down the street. It didn't come to fruition, but at the time it was mixed use, 3-story building, And above the retail space, there was going to be, I think it was 2 apartments and his residence, right? So based on your recommendations, that'd be 1.5 parking spaces for 3 different potential families to share. That doesn't seem very realistic. That means that basically each family is going to be sharing half of a car. That
Rounded up to 2. Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, but 2 for 3 families does not seem realistic.
Right.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out if you're going to build a building where there is no parking, why require parking at all? You know, as part of that plan. It just didn't make sense to me at all.
I'm sorry, can you restate that
say
point?
You're going to put a building up right here.
Mm-hmm.
Tear this down, put up a 3-story building and have residential up there, and there's no place to park. Why would you say a quarter of a space or 1 space or whatever when there's nowhere to park? They're not building a parking lot. They're putting up a building with residential, but you're saying that they have to have a .25 per unit.
They would have to find
They
that
would have
space
to
on
make
the
the
site,
space.
either underground,
Yeah.
as the gentleman said, or they would have to make their building smaller and not do as many units as they could. I mean, you'd still have to fit on some off-street parking as part of the development.
Another thing I was wondering is why the parallel parking instead of angled head in?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you could show that slide, I don't know if your presentation's still loaded. It was titled Shared Street Slide.
Where it showed the angle.
Shows that Milwaukee does that, and I've mentioned Milwaukee in here before. Slightly narrower sidewalks and angle parking, and what they do is they move that parking out, and they set things up for events
And they used to have that in downtown Oregon City, and now it's all parallel parking.
Right. You'd multiply the number of available spaces.
Well, we actually did do that calculation earlier in the project to see what more it would yield, and it didn't yield that many more parking spaces. And I don't remember the exact calculation, but because there were enough driveways to kind of to eliminate even the amount that you have to reconfigure.
But if you're going to redevelop a block, or a block is redeveloped, how many of those driveways would continue to exist?
I think in the core area, where, between Dartmouth and Arlington, especially these buildings right here, on the south side of Dartmouth, there's no driveways for any of those. It's just parallel parking. And I don't know if you've ever been to Whitefish, Montana, but it looks like Gladstone. Downtown, only longer and bigger. And they have that head-in angled parking, and it's easy to park. I mean, parallel parking is not for everybody. And
well, I mean, we used it here tonight.
Well,
parking in this building.
Yeah,
right.
Angle parking.
Exactly.
Yeah, on the side, that's a good example of how well that works. Like, I can zip in and zip out even.
That's the way they do it during the car show too, and it goes for quite a few blocks.
And I was just wondering why.
There's actually kind of a more important reason, which is we looked at that and did the math, and it eliminates the bike lanes. So it not both one, but it reduces the space enough. It reduces the space enough so that you couldn't do 2 bike lanes, and so that's why. Combined, just one moment, please. Combined with the issue of that you don't get that much additional parking out of it. The engineer did do that calculation as well. Then
it seems like you do. If you look at the side over here, it looks like you get a lot more.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Susan.
When I saw the shared traffic of bikes, I would love to see that the whole way down Portland Avenue. Also, right now it seems like City Hall is no longer going to be here. It's going to be down across from the high school, along with the police department, and that would be another good reason. it would slow traffic down. Then you could have angled parking the whole way. I would also love it if you think commercial first floor the whole way down. Thank you.
So, I know you've probably been waiting for me to do it all night. I do have a nitpick. So, in your surveys, I'm gonna point out 2 surveys, and then I'm gonna point out one of the other things you guys have in your development code strategies. So, in the survey, you mentioned that 74% of the respondents traveled along Portland Avenue by car, and then you responded that 90.9% of the customers and employees got to the business by car. But then when it came to doing the development code strategies, you wanted to eliminate businesses like, say, BlackRock, which would have a smaller footprint and less parking, because it says drive-throughs promote vehicular use of the corridor. So I'm a little confused. It seems like smaller footprint and less parking is in line with this plan, but instead of that, you're going against the 94%, was it? 90% and the 74% of the respondents, because it's not a bike. So I had a concern about that.
I mean, one of the kind of the foundational, I think, ideas at the outset of this process, and I'm talking before the consultants even got involved, was the idea of connecting the bike route from Abernathy down to the river. That was essentially kind of an underlying assumption of the task we were given. And so that's why, which incidentally, based on just sort of planning practices for creating a good Main Street, is also the way you want to go, we would argue. So that's why there's been an emphasis the whole time on making that bike connection.
Yes, I'm not arguing that we have bikes. What I'm asking about is that the argument listed here for not allowing, say, small coffee shops or even bank ATMs
drive-throughs, right?
Is that it's because people want to use cars. That's the reason you're saying that those businesses can't be allowed. That seems disingenuous since they require less footprint and less parking.
Again, it's an urban form type question. Basically drive-throughs are typically in conflict with pedestrians or non-motorized transportation modes. And not that drive-throughs are bad, but there are places that they are better suited for than a downtown area that you really want to have more people shopping, walking, sitting, eating. And again, it's just they don't entice people to get out of their car. They entice people to stay in their car because they're drive-throughs and they're convenient. So again, it is a choice, but it is very typical for downtowns to ban them, to not allow them in a certain area, because you're trying to promote different things.
If I could say something from being on traffic safety, the BlackRock isn't in the area anyway, so it's on the outlying area.
A couple blocks away.
But it's outside the area, so that's kind of different. And it does, like she said, it's less safe for pedestrians to have the driveways, and we do that even now when people want to build up stuff. We watch where the driveways are going, so there are less driveways to deal with. So that one I kind of understand. But going back to the bicycles, and I am one of the people who wanted the trolley trail to continue through Gladstone. I was really disappointed that didn't happen, because I think it would be much better for Gladstone to have it coming through so people come through. And I also am very against ever-lowering speed limits, as some people know here, but taking it down to 15 miles an hour, getting rid of one of the bike lanes and doing the angle in seems like that would kind of be a compromise all over. 8 feet already seems big enough for 2 bikes to go either way. If I remember seeing they had chevrons and bikes in the street anyway on Portland Avenue, which if it was 15 miles an hour would really not be a big issue anyway. It would discourage people from driving down Portland Avenue, which would kind of force them into not driving down. And I don't live downtown, but I do walk down. It's a mile exactly from my house to walk downtown, and it's extremely doable. Will it be doable when I'm, 15 years older? I don't know. Of course, there's got to be parking somewhere for people who simply can't. But I really think that the angle parking was in the 2006 or 2008 plan, wasn't it? Do any of y'all remember reading that?
It was in this
one of the options.
at the back in the Johnson Economics report somewhere, where there's some recommendations. Michael, do you remember why everybody was opposed to that?
To the angled parking?
Yeah, or why?
Well, it mostly was what Darcy says. With existing driveways and other things and the size of the blocks, it didn't pencil out as to a large gain in the number of spaces. Now, as far as the ease of getting in and out, that's another factor. It also puts the cars farther out into the street and, as Brendan pointed out, removes the possibility of having the bike lane. So those were the factors that were part of the decision. The streetscape designs that are on here are very similar to those that were in the 2008 project. And one of the good things about this project is that they did go back and look at the 2006 study, parking, and the 2008 streetscape project, these things that were never implemented by the city, and at least use them as a bit of a starting point for the work on there. For the people who felt that work was done and abandoned, at least it got a new life in this. And it was consulted and lifted from, drawn upon for these designs. But what we heard most often in the meetings from the consultants was that if we imagined somehow we were going to gain more spaces by only having the front of the car against the curb instead of the entire car against the curb, that was really not going to happen. We had a very long, straight stretch of uninterrupted road, you might get a significant increase with that style of parking. But that wasn't the case in the current situation. And when we talk about redeveloping a block, that's not so much, the redevelopment will happen, as Mr. Dukeman said, incrementally. One building at a time, one building owner at a time. It's not like the city is going to say, let's just take everything from Clarendon to Dartmouth and redo it. We're not going to have that luxury. We're going to have to count on the entrepreneurs and the business owners, the Bob Everetts who may say, I want to redevelop my building now, or the other owners or people who purchase a piece of property that's available and say, now I'm ready to do something with it. But it's not so much that the city is going to invest a great deal of money in the buildings that are on these streets, except for the library building, and which I also, Sharon, hope that it will be
in my lifetime.
Well, in far less than 5 years. The committee was tasked with this responsibility at a time in the life of these projects when there was still a great deal of uncertainty. We were in the midst of a lawsuit with the county and weren't sure if we were ever going to get a library here. And at the time, we were talking about a combination City Hall library, and since then, the City Hall has moved up. And all the employees who currently park in this region because they work at City Hall will be parking many blocks to the north. And all the people who currently park in this region because they work at the police station will also be many blocks to the north. And all the people who clog up the streets on court day because they have a court date because they got a ticket for picking dandelions in one of our parks will also be attending court at a facility much farther away. And I don't know how we can gauge how much new parking we're going to gain through the relocations of those buildings and possibly the addition of a parking lot where the current library is. But all those factors, plus just, it seems to me it draws on the ability of the community to be very creative. When we had one of our meetings, Natalie made this comment, you know, why aren't we thinking in terms of shuttle buses from existing lots? I've not spoken to anybody there about this, and I don't know anybody connected with Gladstone Christian Church, which is 2 long city blocks away up Dartmouth Street. But it seems to me that if they don't have anything going on, say, a Friday night or a Saturday night, and they wanted to operate some kind of a shuttle that would park 20 or 30 cars in their lot and bring them down Clarendon, drop them off on Portland Avenue, and then pick up the people who've just finished eating at one of these brew pubs or restaurants that Stacy is envisioning, and then take them back to their cars, we would do a lot to solve the envisioned parking problem. Now, that may not be appropriate for all hours of the day, but we have a lot of underutilized off-street parking already, and a little cooperation between business owners so that the people who have a business that operates primarily in the daytime could share that lot with the people who have a business that operates primarily in the nighttime, I think would go a long way to alleviating some of these concerns. And perhaps shuttle buses, maybe down to GCCF too in the evening, would make it possible to have the kind of destination things in the evening hours. You might not still be able to always park right in front of your hair salon when you come down for an appointment in the middle of the day, which may be a lot of people's concern. But I think if we see the kind of growth and the kind of new businesses that we're talking about, we can certainly come up with some creative solutions to expand the available parking.
Well, I think to finish up what I was saying about the angle parking, the other thing is that when I added up those numbers, it's like 80 feet, and I recall it being 51 feet to go across the road. So I'm not sure, is 80 feet now what the road size is? But I mean, when you count those up,
side to side, including the sidewalks. This is the current.
Straight up to the building is what you're saying. It's 80 feet. Okay. Okay, then that's great. Then I guess that would theoretically work, and it would theoretically work to have a shuttle. I mean, heck, if you're going to think about theoretically, Dartmouth is big enough we could put a trolley straight down the middle. As long as the people aren't paying for it, I don't think that would be a problem. But coming up with wonderful ideas, it always ends up, that, like the lady was saying, coming on the people that own houses having to have their rates go up, which is just not where Gladstone's at, is taking on extra burden to, we learned with the school that even though they say it's only going to be $100 or so a year, it's actually going to be $700. So we've got real issues with taking on bonds here with good reason. So to even fancy the idea of doing shuttle buses and that stuff, I mean, I don't know, that's just craziness. Keeping it simple with what are we going to do? And this isn't exactly a written in stone. I mean, my gosh, the plan from 2008 was never even touched. So theoretically, this could go as far as that went, which I hope it doesn't. But we can certainly address stuff more in the future. That's
I think what we should do right now is finish up our questions for the presenters, because we're not going to get through this tonight.
Yeah.
And we've got to get through this whole, through this whole thing and come up with a plan. I know Les has got a lot of stuff. Do you have questions for the presenters, or is it something that we need to discuss when we do our deliberations?
More discussion, I would think, than anything. But I do question the point was made by one of the commenters earlier about what we're going to allow down in our commercial zones. I'm not anti-row house, but I just as soon not see a bunch of row houses lined up on Portland Avenue. Anyone that isn't looking at this from a outside or a bigger view is overlooking something, and I would just say that bigger view is, we've been here forever, nothing's changed. You heard Bob Everett. That is very true, but one thing I can promise you, we have a tremendous population growth. We have an urban growth boundary that's been managed in a manner that is exacerbating that. The property values are way up. So things are going to happen in Gladstone. Some of it is organically going to happen. And we're putting a lot of pressure on the environment. All of the recent land use decisions we've made have been, a lot of them, there's been a lot of controversy because of the density, because of the traffic and the issues. So I don't want to be too long-winded here, but I really see that we need to be careful with this downtown. We don't need to act desperate. It's coming, folks. It is coming. And with that in mind, you know, how much are we going to rely on other people to make things happen? How much are we going to rely on outside sources to supplement? We can create a situation where we're broke and we're putting such demands on them for development that now we're starting to scare them off. So I've got some concerns about the numbers, and I'll have some comments about a couple things later, but here I am. At the same time, I don't have a lot of questions right now, and I'm for the spirit of this. I'm for a lot of what I'm seeing, so I'll just end with that. Thank you.
Any more questions of the presenters?
Just one quick one.
Go ahead.
This is pretty specific. If you go to Appendix, what is it, A?
Yes.
Page 3, it talks about establishing points of main entrance in the city. Is this current? Is this something I'm missing here? Because it's down at the bottom, policy 2, and it's C down there. Do you have that? Where it says the 3 places, the north side of the highway, the 99 bridge, both ways, right? I get that. The next one is intersection of Highway 99 at Meldrum. That doesn't seem like a very good, that isn't an uncontrolled intersection that has just a short street that gets you to Abernathy. I'm not sure that's a really good choice. And the last one, Oatfield Road at Hull Avenue, does not exist. Hull Avenue does not go to Oatfield Road. It dead ends.
Portland, or up above Portland, yeah.
So I'm just curious where these, I would think that it would be Glen Echo, Gloucester, Dartmouth, something like that.
So the Appendix A is existing comprehensive plan language, and what's new is underlined. So it's in a legislative amendment format, so that what is proposed to be deleted is struck out, and then what's proposed to be added is underlined. So we didn't change that. It sounds like that C is something that needs to be changed. We just didn't do it.
Okay. Well, I just
So
want to make
it's
sure, yeah, that's taken care of, because I think there's better spots than that to enter the city at.
Apparently that did exist in 1979.
It did. Well, the place used to be, yeah, it was.
Town center.
Yeah, the same.
Well, I don't know about Oatfield Road and Hull, because that never existed.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure where that came from.
And you would know, because you've been here since the beginning of
Yes, I've driven
time.
up and down Oatfield Road 1,000 times.
That got me was the creation of McLaughlin Boulevard in 1970 something.
Yeah,
That was
that was
there in
another-
1930 something.
I think they meant 205.
Well, no, they said McLaughlin specifically that took a lot of the traffic off of Portland Avenue.
Yeah, but I think
What
that-
happened was is they took it from a state highway to something else, or they changed when they built 205.
Yeah,
They
that's
changed
what
something there, but that was a California highway before that ran from Washington to California, Highway 99. So part of this was saying the reason why there's no traffic downtown is because of McLaughlin. And in the 1970s, which is not correct because it's been there since the 1930s.
It's really the 205 freeway and the development around it. I think that was more of a factor. I mean, and the freeway opened at about 71-ish, and that of course is where we have all of our drive-through business.
Yeah, and the Harley place, which has made us famous. That's what made Gladstone famous, the
Flag.
Harley place.
Yeah, big flag.
So,
I have a couple of questions.
All right.
Hopefully they're quick, but and then I'd like to follow it up with a comment. Is there anything in the plan for Abernathy to the new city properties on the north end of Portland Avenue, going past the high school football field on one side and the high school itself on the other side? Is any of that factored into this plan? Okay. And then how about river access on the south end of Portland Avenue? Is anything in the plan for that?
No, that final block between Abernathy and the river
was included in the earliest stages of the planning process, and then as we went through it and talked about we started to get into brass tacks about what might happen on Portland Avenue, it came up that whatever happens with the bridge down there is really going to define how that block works, that sort of entryway into the park, into the bridge. And so the short answer is that block, decisions on that were sort of put off and punted in this plan.
Now I get to be a citizen. I live here too for 35 years. I'm excited about a lot of what you're trying to do. I think the problem that you're going to deal with until this is completed is the issue of parking. I don't pretend to know what the solution is. I don't think any of us up here does. But to turn a blind eye and indicate that it's not a problem is not doing right by any of us, in my opinion. Mr. Osborne made a comment about a couple of neighborhoods in Portland. And the last thing you want, at one time I worked on Division Street, 37th and Division in the late 60s, early 70s, and there was absolutely nothing there between 20th and 39th. I mean nothing. Now there must be 50 places to eat between 20th and 39th Street. And if you go up Division to go to one of those restaurants, you can park 4 to 5 to 6 blocks off Division Street in front of people's homes who probably aren't terribly thrilled to see people piling out of their car heading for a restaurant. I think the one solution you have, as Mr. Milch said about the people that work downtown that will be moving to the north end of Portland Avenue, will probably help. But any future development where you try to flush residential people's parking onto a public street is in direct opposition to what's good for the business community, and you'll have an ongoing head knock on that forever and ever and ever. Again, I don't know what the answer is. That's what you guys get paid for. But to allow it to just say, well, a lot of congestion, just okay. Minimal congestion's fine. Any more than that is a pain in the neck, and it tends to steer people away from your business instead of to it. And in the 2 or 3 people that have businesses on Portland Avenue that I talk to, they don't think they have enough parking now. So imagine an urban village environment where parking's limited, and you know, I've ridden bikes, I've ridden trains, I've ridden buses, use them all. I think it's an important, integral part of a transportation system. But so are personal vehicles, whether they end up being hovercraft in 30 years and don't need parking, they can go in bays. But people are going to take their own vehicles to get to where they need to go in a suburban area like this. Last question I had is, there are a couple of businesses on Portland Avenue that aren't what I would call urban village friendly. One of them's a heating and cooling company, and another one at the north end of, or excuse me, the south end of Portland Avenue. There's a 4-bay garage right off of Portland Avenue. How are they going to be able to fit in to this new environment? Or are they going to be able to fit in?
Well, it's important that this plan and any plan, it's important for everyone to understand that it's not forcing any private developers, or I'm sorry, private property owners or business owners to have to move or do anything with their property. So the answer is that they are welcome, parts of the community. The owner of the heating business has been to multiple meetings of ours. He's been very involved in talking about what he'd like to see on Portland Avenue. So nothing will force those types of businesses to go. But you talk about change over time, and it's important to always remember that with this plan or any plan. It's not going to look like this all of a sudden 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Private development is a process that, as we've all seen in wherever we live, whatever neighborhood we happen to live in. It happens piece by piece over a long period of time until one day you wake up and you realize that some threshold has been crossed, I guess.
Yeah, and certainly with the parking, again, we've been talking about trade-offs. You know, we're trying to fit together the puzzle pieces in a way that makes sense in order to get some of the types of uses that the community said they'd like to see, but that doesn't, I guess that comes with a cost if you want to talk about parking, an increase in parking, increase in traffic, increase in people. Not all those things are happy outcomes from a more active center. Division is a really good example of just an explosion of activity, and certainly property owners have been impacted, and property prices have been impacted in that area, and that is, you know, maybe, you know, the flip side of the coin. So, you know, the consultant team's done what we could do to kind of identify what some of those pushes and pulls are. If you tweak something here, you could get a higher building, right? That's not to say that's right for Gladstone, and we're not presuming to say it is, but we were charged with a particular mission, and through that we found these pieces that you could tweak in order to get something a little different. It's really up to the community to figure out if it's worth the trade-off, and if we've kind of hit it right, if we've got the right mixture. Certainly with parking requirements, we've seen, you know, across the metro area, centers have reduced parking requirements. If you're a commercial enterprise in downtown Hillsborough, you do not have to do off-street parking. They also have a municipal parking lot. So, you know, there are different pieces that you could work with, and you can come up with kind of different formulas. And these are simply recommendations to consider. And as far as the code amendments go, you will have to go through another legislative process. You will need to re-examine each and every one of those suggestions. And we only covered a handful. I mean, there's a number of identified recommended changes that you have to re-examine and see, you know, well, is that really right for Gladstone, and what does that mean again? And maybe we should back off of that one a little bit. But yeah, certainly parking is always going to be an issue. It is now. It will be in the future. It could be worse. Probably not ever going to be much better unless the city wants to address something like a municipal parking lot.
So I definitely agree with you. There's trade-offs, and as a direct example of what he said about the businesses and what happens to them. So a couple weeks ago, I was meeting a friend at McMenamins in Oregon City. After a half hour to an hour of driving around in circles trying to find one single parking spot that I could use, I almost left. The only reason I didn't is because there was one opening as I was leaving the town. I avoid going to Oregon City. I think it's beautiful there, but I avoid going because I can never find parking. So, you know, I agree with you. There's trade-offs. It looks beautiful, but I avoid going there because you can't park. So, I mean, that's what it is.
I have a question. Words matter. You hear that all the time. There's references to the downtown revitalization project, the downtown revitalization plan, and I'm not trying to mince words here, but there are references to, and I've heard the reference to a town center. Well, a town center is a specific designation, such as Clackamas Town Center. Do we really have a designation? Is this more of a Main Street project, or is it a town center? Those are two completely different animals, and it seems a little ambiguous about that. And down the road, what we call it will matter. I mean, what's allowed and what the regional connectivity is, and getting into the weeds that you love and know. So. And
even the requirements are tied to the core,
right,
to the C2. So yeah, even the requirements are different as you go out from your center. And part of it is semantics. I mean, you have a place here, and you can call it what you want to call it. We've have some nomenclature in the plan just so that you can implement different things related to a different geography.
Because we call this a town center versus a main street or a revitalization project, and in the eyes of Metro or others, that's why I'm asking. We all know what we're doing here. That's not why I'm asking the question. But what we legally call this and how it's viewed by others, it just needs to be clear there, because if I said we're going to put in a town center in Gladstone, well, well, that means you're going to bring 40,000 people here, and light rail and everything else. You see what I'm saying? And I know that's not what we're doing.
And you're absolutely, yes, you're absolutely correct. It is a designated town center from the regional, kind of construct, right? Town centers are completely different across the region, and they're great variability. So just because you have that designation does not mean that you look like Hollywood in Portland.
No, but
does
it
not
does
mean you look
we
like
meet
Sherwood.
Metro's criteria.
And
I've
you
read
do.
it, and it's
And you
pretty
do.
extensive.
And it's probably part of the reason why you got the grant, because they are looking to make these places successful. And yes, so absolutely. But that doesn't mean that this plan should do anything but reflect what the community
I understand
wants to
that,
see.
but then
Right.
you can see why I'm asking. It's like anything. We've got a health care measure out there, and if I call it by the wrong number, people are going, what?
No, you don't have to worry.
Thank you.
So I think what our job is going to be is to go through this, which I thought was, thank you so much for doing the presentation, answering our questions too.
Pleasure.
But there's a lot of stuff in here from a lot of different times. We got to sort all that out and come up with a plan of how we're going to go through this and make our recommendation to City Council. So by the time we go to City Council, hopefully we'll have a similar thing of what was presented to us tonight with our modifications to say this is what the Planning Commission recommends that we do for the comprehensive plan. And that's obviously not going to happen tonight. There's a lot of stuff we need to do here. I've got a gazillion tabs of different things that I think that we need to discuss to come up with something that the citizens of Gladstone will like and that's going to work. And this is a great thing we're doing. We have to scale it to what Gladstone is. And then once we're done with that, then City Council will probably do the same thing we're doing.
If I could help a little bit with sort of how to maybe think about this or prioritize your next step, I would just say that for where we are now, you've been given the plan itself and then a bunch of appendices, right? And it adds up to hundreds of pages. Where we're at right now, and for your recommendation and what the council will be considering, the sort of a lot of the appendices are documenting the process. They're talking about existing conditions reports as background information, and it's all important. But I think if you're needing to prioritize what you want to spend the most time on, what I would say is obviously the plan document itself, Appendix A, those are the recommended comprehensive plan amendments, and so of the actual action of approval of what will actually be happening, Appendix A, those changes to the comprehensive plan are one of the main things that will actually be happening with approval. So you want to cover that. Appendix A, yes. Appendix C gives more detail on the transportation aspects. That's I would recommend probably looking at that one. Appendix B are all the recommended code amendments that you would that the city would also have to consider in the future through other processes. There's a lot of things and details in there that you'll definitely find interesting, but just know that isn't Appendix B is not one of the things that's going to be implemented through this. And then everything else I think you can assess for yourself, but I just want to point out that the plan document itself and Appendix A are probably the most critical things.
Okay.
Is that right?
What about the overlay map? Should that also be a part of the attachment?
Yes, the one other than
Appendix A, isn't it?
I thought it was.
I don't know.
Part of Appendix A.
Is it?
Opportunities and constraint maps.
Or a description of it? Okay. The thing to know is that the other than the language in Appendix A in the comp plan, the other thing it does is it does adopt the idea of the downtown core on those 4 blocks into the comprehensive plan map, but not the zoning map. So,
and what about the 4-hour window thing? So
no.
that's the. So I don't think anybody was questioning this.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
The only thing people were questioning was the L shape on the 4-hour parking. Right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is actually different than that parking map.
Yeah.
So none of that parking map. Those all remain as recommendations, but they're not part of what would be put into the comp plan in any official way at this point. So just to make sure that everyone knows that what would be added to the comp map is the blue line here. Of those 4 blocks, it covers the 4 blocks of Portland Avenue and the properties that front onto Portland Avenue itself.
Tammy, can we also make sure that Jim Wynot is aware of this in regards to our GIS system as a possible layer for that?
And basically that does become an overlay and allows you to regulate that area differently, to treat that area differently in the future. So you've identified it as a special place that should look a little different and should actually develop a little different, and that sets you up for those future actions.
An interesting thing about Gladstone, we talk about gateways, we've got the rivers. Portland Avenue, unlike so many places, is so easy to find. You know, you almost stumble upon it if you're driving through here. So I'm not against gateways, but there's also a point where we're spending a lot of time and energy trying to make a statement, and we're putting some beautiful frosting on a cake, and we really need a good cake first. But again, it's a place that has great potential, and we all know that. And I'll just close by saying that it's a precious place. Go find one. How many are left? You know, whether you like what they're doing in Oregon City or whether you think light rail and everything going on in Hillsborough is wonderful, no matter where you're living right now in this region, how many Gladstones are left? We're not going to be Lentz. We're not really Portland. We're right where the growth is hitting. You know, it's Damascus, it's Oregon City, it's this area where the people are coming, and that's why I made the comments I said earlier. They're coming, and we can say nothing happened here for all those years, but right now people are fighting to save the wetlands and the parklands, and you're hearing a lot of concerns about traffic and all these growing pains. We're going to have those pains if we don't do anything downtown. And so from the regional view, we need to be real careful about what we do here, and it's pretty obvious to you that we're not interested in the boilerplate approach. And as much as I've worked to help get the grant for the bridge, and as heartbroken as I still am 3 years later over the loss of it, we know that that's probably a $7, $8, whatever, $9 million project, $10 million, I don't know. But anyone that believes the traffic is going to come down Portland Avenue and not dump on that crazy Arlington mess and end up choked up at 99, we're back to this traffic thing. So I'll just close by saying it was those things that caused me to vote against the transportation plan, the TSP. That core issue has shown its face repeatedly here today, and that's what we really need to work on. And I would also say that how we accommodate commerce downtown is really important. How are we going to do loading? I don't need to bring you all the pictures I've been taking lately of all the illegal loading going on, and the UPS guy driving up 2 tires up on the sidewalk. You see it all. So we need to really think about the public safety, and we want as many people on that trail, I call it the trail, in my mind it's already done, down to Cross Park as we can. We certainly want that. So however we accommodate the the bicycle trail or that route and how we plan to someday get across that river, I think is imperative. So I would close with one other thought. I heard we had a problem with speed. We need to slow people down. At 20 miles an hour with the police station out front in this community and nowhere to go, we really don't have a speed problem on Portland Avenue. We really don't. And it's a little disingenuous to say we do. But I think slowing it to 15 miles an hour to accommodate the bikes or whatever we need to do to make this happen, that's our biggest challenge. It's the flow of vehicles, pedestrians, and people that are going to somehow interact with all of this eventual development that is just going to make or break it. And it's going to make or break the businesses. There's a lot of places where they're not making it. There's a lot of vacant space because of inadequate parking for commerce. I keep talking about commerce because I keep parking my car on 205, looking at all the commerce around me, parked on 205, going nowhere. So when those trucks and those contractors, like I've been one, are out there parked on the freeway, and then they come into downtown and there's no place to park and no place to unload, we're not doing the right thing. There's 80% of this I'm in love with. There's 20% of this that I have big red flags about. Thank you for your time.
There was something else. I don't remember which page it was on, but there was a section where you guys were talking about offices and about how they don't help with the traffic and stuff like that, with the foot traffic in the downtown area. And I actually wanted to kind of question that because, as far as like bringing in jobs and things like that, I think office space above commercial in a mixed-use environment is probably going to bring in higher-paying jobs than most other businesses we might have. And we have fiber right here on Portland Avenue, which would make that the more likely destination for offices than anywhere else in the city. So I don't remember what page it was on. I just remember you guys discouraged the use of offices, and I just wanted to question that.
Okay. I don't remember that space either, but I think your point is well made, especially as part of mixed use. Office is a great use, so it could be that that I included something that I misphrased or that I didn't intend, or
I think it was one of the recommendations that we ban offices, and there was like 4 or 5 different types of businesses, like industrial and things like that, but office was in the list.
Okay.
I'll double check that.
And I would agree with that. Offices with no drive-throughs would be fine.
Downtown Portland is a prime example.
Yeah.
Most of the foot traffic at lunch comes from offices.
Yep.
And I think it's the mix. A good mix is what's going to economically help with that cost and make things happen.
All right.
Thank everyone for putting up with me.
Thank you. You guys did great.
So what do you guys want to do? 'Cause this is gonna take a lot of work going through this stuff.
Is there any deadlines for when city council needs to have this by?
We had it scheduled to go to the January 9th meeting, but there's no requirement that it goes to January 9th meeting.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible.
No, and I was going to suggest that
It's like we need a work session to go through it.
We have a work session, or that we have a work session at our next meeting, or whatever
what
you
we
think.
can do is continue the meeting to a date certain, and then we, can work on this. And the question would be, you want to do that? Number one. Number two is, shall we do it in 2 weeks or a month, or I don't know what's coming up on. Do we have any big projects coming up?
I haven't heard anything at this point, no.
But I think, this is a huge thing, and I really can't see that. I mean, there's no way I'm going to sit here all night.
No,
until 4 in the morning.
And Commissioner Poole has, there's so much of this that is good, but there are some things that I think we need to really work through before it's ready to be recommended.
I think we've got the intent and the presentation and, what we want to do, but it's like tweaking some of these things to fit more with Gladstone.
And its citizens.
And I think, David, I was thinking we'd leave the public hearing open.
Yeah, that's fine. Again, since it's not a quasi-judicial matter, you don't really have to worry so much about that. You could reopen it and not have to renotice. So what I would suggest is maybe, I don't know about the timing. I'm certainly not going to presume about the city schedule, and Jackie's gone right now, so we don't know what might be on the horizon, as far as council's thoughts or planning commission, additional meetings, that kind of thing. I would defer to her on that. But one thing I was going to say is maybe, whenever that next meeting is, in the interim, certainly the planning commission individual members could go through the packet, maybe identify, 3 or 5 things that are most problematic, or 20.
Got them right there.
But I think in the interest of trying to have a discussion that isn't, that's focused and that's productive.
What I want to do is come up with a focus that we can say this, we're going to work on this, we're going to work through this, and then,
we take votes on them and
to what we're saying we want to recommend the city council.
The other thing I would remind you is you really, there is a lot of information here. But maybe one way to digest it or consider it is to think about how does it inform the proposed comp plan changes? Because at the end of the day, that's really all
our task is.
Well, that's what's going to be adopted. That's all the kind of the work product, if you will, that's going to make it into the plan. And it's really only 4 or 5 pages, maybe even less than that. I mean, it's not.
Just A.
It's 2.5 pages long. So make sure you focus on that first, because that's the part that is ultimately going to get votes.
So let's work on that when we reconvene. We'll just go to Appendix A and we'll come to an agreement on what we want to present to the city council.
So the next council meeting looks like it's January 9th. Is that
Correct.
Right? Second
Yes.
Tuesday.
Well, if we don't
that.
come up with a recommendation before then it's not going to be on their agenda because we won't be done with it, right?
We would
Michael?
need to. Yeah.
Well, my only concern is, this, the final version of the plan was originally scheduled to be completed about April, and then it would go before planning commission and council after that. Because we had a couple of snowstorms last year, it got stretched out where the last meeting ended up being in June. This is the first discussion of it in 6 months since then, and the report that you have tonight has been on the city's website since late September. So it's been there. My only concern, we've drawn out this process so long. I don't know if we have the funds left in the budget to keep inviting the staff back. Jenny, you'd probably be the best one to answer that. I know that when and then we rescheduled because of doing the transportation plan, recalls and resignations at city staff and council level, and the concerns about parking that came up from a group of citizens. We decided to focus more attention on that and not do it in August as we had planned. Jenny, do you have a concern over extending it to, say, a February council meeting?
As far as funding goes,
yeah.
I think we would be okay to do another meeting.
Okay. I do know that was one of the things Jackie asked you about when we extended this schedule. So if that's not an issue,
I think the point we're
and
at.
you may be able to do it without so much the consulting staff here.
We don't need the part we're going into now. I don't think we need the consulting staff.
All right.
The planning commission needs to get together and discuss and what our recommendation's going to be, and then we could schedule that meeting for the city council. And I'm sure that city council is going to have a lot of stuff to say about it, and there'll be more public testimony and all that too.
Well, remember, you're not being asked to parse the code changes or any of that kind of stuff as you did on some of the transportation plan issues. This is a vision,
right,
and a comp plan changes that are 2.5 pages long.
Right. So, unless you guys want to vote on it now, it's up to you. somebody wants to make a motion, go ahead.
I think it's important as a commission, a board, that we're all on the same page, and I don't think we're all on the same page in the sense of feeling comfortable exactly what it is we're going to be recommending. Am I speaking for a majority here or no?
I agree with you, and I think, you know, saying as part of the comprehensive plan that we want to have 4-story buildings is not where I'm at today.
Yeah, and I would add that you're right. When we get right down to it, the actual final product that we turn out is a comp plan. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard it's just a guiding vision, it's just a document. Well, down the road, if you want to change the zoning of something, you just go ahead and do it. Metro said it would be easy just to rezone that property down there at the wetlands. Not true. It is an incredibly expensive, complex process. So when we put together a comp plan or any changes to it, we're having big effects, big impacts. So, yeah, we need to funnel it down, but I really think we need more time. And certainly I think we can have ourselves ready for our next meeting to have something to approve. I mean, that would be real easy. But our next meeting would be January 16th, I believe. No. Yeah.
How does everyone else feel?
Yeah.
Pat, what about, are you ready to vote on this?
Well,
I'm just not ready.
probably closer than maybe some of the rest of you are. My main concerns about it, as everyone else voiced too, related to parking. And the other things I'm fairly comfortable with.
Okay.
But that's a great big matzo ball right in the middle of the plan. And again, while I don't pretend to have the answer, I'm not. Something needs to be done to make sure that
it's addressed.
It's addressed. That businesses, nearby residents, aren't in constant conflict with parking. Again, you get to wave the magic wand, not me. Other than parking, I'm fairly comfortable with what's in the Appendix A.
Well, Appendix A doesn't really talk about the parking.
No, it doesn't.
If I could just mention, I agree with Commissioner Poole that this does set the vision, and it does talk about what this area looks like in the future. So it does set you up for future actions, and if you're not comfortable with the vision or how things are addressed in the plan, this is your opportunity to recommend to City Council that language be changed, policy statements be changed, that certain things are made explicit in the plan. I think that's a very good use of your time to do that. The other thing I want to mention is that your TSP, your Transportation System Plan, is also part of your comprehensive plan, and it is consistent with what is shown in this downtown plan as well. With the exception of how the core is treated. So this adopting this plan actually would modify your TSB slightly if you are recommending approval of that Festival Street curbless cross-section. So what's nice is it's all within your existing right-of-way. You're not talking about taking property or making more hardscape. You're actually reconfiguring the space that you already have, which is nice, but it is a difference from your TSB. So from that standpoint as well, you want to be comfortable with the recommendations in this plan, or again, be explicit on how this plan should change with regards to the streetscape. So,
I personally, I like the idea of the curbless Festival Street type of thing. I'm a little confused why it switches back to curb as you get closer to the water. That was a little confusing. I personally would not like to see like a 3-story apartment complex across the street from here, but at the same time, the 3-story mixed-use building down the street, nobody really complained about that. And so I think there is a big difference in the mind of the public between, a little commercial with a couple of apartments above versus an apartment complex. They see them differently. My biggest problem, obviously, is things like the parking. I really couldn't get behind less than one parking for in a residential unit. That doesn't make any sense to me. I just can't imagine what somebody would do with less than one with one parking space. And the thing is, we had a mixed use that had the parking based on our current code. So I'm also a little confused why we're saying we can't do it when somebody was already doing it. So there are some things like that that I'm not quite comfortable with. As far as the general vision, I like the general vision. I think, like I said, I think Oregon City's downtown looks beautiful, right? But I do have concerns about the fighting. You know, Northwest 23rd, for example, residents can't park anywhere and they walk a mile to get to their own home. We don't want anything like that, obviously. So there's obviously concerns that we have to take into account for some of that. And so for me personally, I mean, this, you know, the couple of pages here doesn't cover a lot of that. All right, but we're not just approving those 2 pages. And I understand that's the primary focus, but that, you know, we're adopting the whole thing, not just those 2 pages. So for me personally, I feel like we would at least need to discuss it as a group before we make a recommendation.
I agree.
I'm totally with, I'm exactly where you're at now.
Mr. Chairman, is there any value to, you know, I'm not sure this is in their bailiwick here, but to have someone facilitate the meeting that we have to try to move us through it? Things will come up that we won't have answers to in our discussions.
Well, I think, and it's, you know, everybody has an input on that, is that we've had the public testimony, the majority of it. We've got the consultants paid to be here. I think we've utilized that. I think when we know what we need to do is we need to go through this and present the city council a modified vision for the comprehensive plan. I personally don't think we need to bring back all the consultants to do that.
I was thinking maybe one. It's just a thought.
Well, at this point, we're just saying, well, if we pretty much are okay with everything except the parking, which is really going to have the biggest impact on...
Well, based on this, I wouldn't make that assumption.
I hear what everybody else is saying, but I have other reservations beside the parking. So,
but none that you brought up for the...
Yes, yeah, I did. I did the financing. I was talking about that. That's one of my big concerns, is a lot of the financing in here. I didn't get to all of it, but I did ask about the urban renewal. There's other things too, but what I'm saying is, just for me, it's just not parking. That's all I want to express.
I do want to add, just because you know, parking is and has been a discussion point throughout the process. I just want to make sure that as you discuss it and think about it, you remember that we are talking about trade-offs. The reason that we've talked about some of the parking changes is to help enable some of the development and land use changes. So I just want to re-emphasize that, just so that you remember that it's not simply, you know, if you make recommendations and make decisions about parking, just know that it isn't just a simple like separate issue off to the side that you can take or leave. I don't want to overstate it either, but just know that it's all interrelated. Okay, yeah.
But when we set the bar low, then we can't bring it up. Whereas if we say they have to have 2, then we could lower it. But by saying it, they only need a half, we can't say, well, no, actually, here you need 2.
Yeah, we can never require more than what's in the code.
And I'm pretty sure, as far as the financial goes, that nothing's going to happen without that approval happening. I mean, it'll be like every other comprehensive plan that's ever happened. It just never happens because the funding's not going to come through. The funding won't come through. I don't think accepting the plan commits any taxpayers or people for spending any money, does it? I mean,
and that final vote would come with the city council anyway.
Exactly. I'm not sure that that's our...
That's not really...
This is a book on recommendations, and if they're saying, the one about the urban renewal is in there several times about their recommendations. So if I sign my name to it, I'm saying I recommend city council, if it comes up, I agree with this should be done. I'm not going to agree with that. So that's my problem with the finance. It's not just parking. That's kind of my
There's
point.
other things like what needs to go to planning, what's, gonna be approved outright and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's gonna be part of that comprehensive plan that we need to discuss.
This is not to make it simple, but it is a big deal because it's going to be our vision moving forward for our city. So it's important we're very clear and decisive about what we recommend, because it's going to be the roadmap to move forward.
But are they going to be able to tell us anything? Are you going to be able to tell us anything about the financial stuff? Is there anything that you could address with the financial stuff at this point? How the money's going to be gathered to do this stuff? Is that in your auspice? Is that
the way that I would think about it is the public projects being recommended are the same as any other public projects. This is making recommendations for the street treatment of Portland Avenue, just as I think the TSP that you recently considered made recommendations on public improvement projects. So how those are eventually financed and done will be the same as any other street project the city might undertake.
Before the vote.
But in terms of talking about strategies for possible implementation, that's where urban renewal is emphasized in the plan, and I certainly don't want to say that it's not. But I don't think you should think about financing the downtown plan as being separate from the way that the city would go about financing any project that the city finds important.
So by accepting this is not binding for spending the money or using.
Not at all. The stuff in there is a recommendation for how it could be done.
It could be, but
there are multiple amount. But I mean, admittedly, there's not a ton of strategies. I mean, every city struggles with this. I completely agree. This is look at the what public improvements that would be here is basically. You get the plan in place, you have the design that's in place, you have the feel and the way that the downtown would work. That's kind of what you're doing here. But then, with respect to the public improvements, that's just another thing you're adding to your list of a pretty long list. To be candid, you've got sewer and water issues, you've got a number of things. So there's nothing about that and I did not take believe me a really detailed look at this, but in terms of what was being offered as far as strategies goes, there was nothing in there that was surprising. It's pretty much how you'd finance public improvements, or the different ways you could do so with virtually every public improvement.
I think I can maybe so just taking one small example out of this, the street lights, right? It's very possible that could come out of our street fund. It's very possible that we could work with PGE to get those paid for. It's possible it could come out of the urban renewal if it's in that district. That's not going to be decided until that's actually a project that's been budgeted for, and it goes through that cycle. And so that becomes part of the budget committee, and it goes through. So there's a process for any of these projects. There'll be a whole process.
Say we want those kind of street lights. That's part of what we're doing here.
Right.
We're basically setting some new codes for how we want to see this.
A standard and then later the codes will come to that.
Yeah. But if they're not met, they're not going to happen. I'm not saying I have a next with it. I'm trying to address Bill's issues with not wanting to do it. And if we could, next month, if we want to put in there, if you want to suggest, we would recommend it, but wouldn't saying we don't make any recommendation about urban renewal or something like that.
What I'm saying is it needs to be addressed and talked about before we go ahead and just say it's good. You could say that about everything in this plan. Nothing in here is going to become a law when we say it's just all recommendation. The parking, they don't have to approve that either. So when I talk about financing, they don't have to. You're right, they don't have to approve that, but nothing has to be approved in here. It's just a recommendation.
Exactly.
But to recommend, we talked about private money. This money would be going to public buildings, possibly, yes.
Possibly
that's my
we
problem.
Wouldn't spend it.
Well, that,
It
what I'm
wouldn't
saying is it
happen.
needs to be addressed and talked about before
Right.
I would
Okay.
I would say
Mhm.
yes. That's all I'm saying.
But we don't need them to be here.
I didn't say we did.
Mhm.
I don't
So we
think
can, we can discuss all of this next month.
Right.
That's just.
Or
and-
earlier if you want.
Well, not the first week of
Okay.
January, but.
So that was the question.
Not the first
we
week of
schedule-
January.
If we
So-
schedule
I've got
a work
library board
session, it'll
meetings and
snow.
LDAC, but
So we've
January.
decided on that, so somebody wanna make a motion to continue the public hearing to a date?
I will
certain?
make a motion that we continue the public hearing until what's the date of our next hearing? The 16th of January as a work session item on our next agenda.
I second that.
In favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No. I just want to get one no in before this.
Okay. Unopposed, Mr. Preble, Commissioner Preble. All right, so the public hearing will be continued.
So I'm just looking for some guidance as to what you're wanting included in your packet. Are you wanting this, all this information included? Are we going
I think
with?
that we have the stuff now, there's no need to do it again.
Yeah.
We would
Okay,
we
so-
would have Randy email you if there was a need, but I think we've
We need
What-
to hold on to
Be
these.
careful with this.
Okay,
Any
so,
new public testimony that comes in.
okay, so you're not wanting the complete packet again for your next work, for the work session?
Yeah.
Just make,
Any-
when you do the sheet, just say, we'll be using the same packet.
Okay,
Right.
But, and just make the whole thing and say, commissioners have the packets
And
from
can
the
you
last meeting.
make sure it gets linked on the website so anybody who doesn't know that can find it.
correct. And we're not wanting,
I don't think it's necessary to have the consultants.
No, we're just gonna be hashing it out.
I mean, unless you guys want to be here for
Tammy, you
free,
can just
that's
say
fine.
continued discussion.
Yeah.
okay.
What's your
That's
phone
something
number at
you
home?
can contact us about before the 16th.
Good.
Because, who knows, once Jackie returns, she may want them here, I don't know.
Well, at
Free
this
time.
point, we're
If-
gonna say we don't
If some
need it.
public hearing stuff comes in over the next month, I think you could let them know if we need them for it.
Yeah, I think that I could confer with whoever, Tammy first, that's my first person.
Okay.
And then, I think at this point, I don't see a need to have the consultants come back for this
No.
next
Did you
part,
catch that?
which we're
I
gonna go
didn't hear
through
the
the stuff.
first
and-
part about
So
what,
we were saying that we don't think we'll need them next time, but
Okay.
if some of the public hearing comes in to make us question that, he'll talk to you about it.
okay, gotcha.
Just clarification, the motion was for a work session at the next
Well,
meeting?
it's a continuation.
A continuation.
We can make our decision then as well,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course. I'm just clarifying that,
It wouldn't be a
because I
work
think that's our
session, then it's
intent.
making a recommendation.
Don't just, I
Just
mean,
continue,
technically you can,
yeah.
it's a continuation of the hearing.
And the
Okay,
reason we
that's,
wanna
I'm just making
continue
it
the
clear
public
so we don't
hearing-
get hung up in a month and find out,
But
we've
if
got
the
a
public wants to
technicality.
testify, then,
Okay.
Then they can.
then they still can, and so on.
Sounds good.
So, we're on to the next item on the agenda, which is business from the planning commission.
Yeah, you figured it out.
I
was
want
just
to bring
saying-
up that half-finished place on Gloucester again, or Gloucester. Again, it's sitting there, it's been boarded up for months, nothing's happened except they removed the chemical toilet. There just seems to me that, and I don't know that it's even in our purview to be involved in that, but it seems to me that there needs to be a finality to a construction project. I'm not saying what it should be, but
I thought the last time you asked about it, there was commentary about whether the permit was still valid.
I do remember that.
I think if they're doing work, David, correct me
Substantial
if I'm wrong, if
progress.
they're doing work, and I've seen them there, I drive by there purposely. I haven't seen them for the past couple of weeks, but I know they've been there in the last month.
I've seen them within the past, week or so.
Okay, and I know
On the
people are
ladder.
working on
I
them, I
don't know
don't
what they
know
were
what
doing.
they're doing. Is there, Tammy, was there any other things from Clay on that property?
Yeah, that's the thing I remember about that is not to just play shuffle the the question, but it is going to be a question for the building department at Clackamas County, because there can be a limitation as to when their building permit would expire. But if they're doing work, however
However,
Yeah.
infrequently.
Well, there's that term substantial progress, whatever that means, and as long
Within
as
a
you're
year,
making
though, usually.
substantial progress,
It's
you're...
going to be up to the building inspector,
Yeah.
building
Well,
official.
the permit will expire after 180 days. It just will expire. Now, I don't think that
If you
helps
haven't,
us.
that's if you haven't pulled it. Yeah.
That's if you
No,
haven't
if-
commenced.
When you buy a permit, it's not, it doesn't last forever, does it? I mean, it's my understanding that a permit
Once-
doesn't last forever. Even if you just do one screw a day, it's still going to go out after
Well, but-
a certain amount of time.
Yeah, I just don't know. Honestly, it's not something I practice in, so I don't know.
We can't do anything about
think
that.
we
We're
need to
also
ask
referring
Clay.
to a
I
remodel,
will
not a new
talk
new
with Clay again.
construction.
The last information I had from him was back in October, indicating he had checked into the building department. No formal violation had been issued. Apparently submitted building plans meet definition of single-family residential and ADU, because we were asking about permits are still valid. Don't know why construction has slowed, but I can certainly ask him for an update on that if you would like.
Thank you.
The other thing is, what if we have additional business from the county for our next meeting?
What if we do?
Are we able to put that off to accomplish this?
Well, if when Tammy puts the package together, or do you do that, Tammy?
Haley does.
You're asking about putting the packets together or finding out what's going to be on the next,
If we have any additional...
any land use?
Land use issues coming in our next meeting in
I can
January.
follow up with Clay on that, and
So what I would say is we're not going to stop anything from happening, any new land use things. We'll put this to the end of the agenda,
okay.
and we'll do what, do our work that we need to do.
Okay.
Bring our jammies.
That's what I think.
Yeah, no, that's what we'll do.
I will double check with the county on that as well to see if there are any land use and give you a heads up to let you know if there are.
All right. Libby?
I have none at this point.
Les?
I have one thing. I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Well, we're still doing
Just having fun. I'm just having
because
fun.
I have something I want to do at the very end.
No, we're fine. I'm
All right.
just having fun.
Bill? I've got nothing.
Nothing.
Okay.
All right.
I have something. This
Cool.
Oh my gosh.
is, see if you know what that is.
It's a 1957 International. I know what the vehicle is.
Well, where is
it's
that?
here, isn't it? There's the library.
Yeah, that's
Oh
the
my
old
gosh.
fountain out there. That's great.
Where'd you find
That's
it?
our street art. That's great.
It's
Dartmouth and
actually,
Fallen
it's
Avenue.
a
Is that what it
press
says? I
photo
can't
from
read that. I can see that, though, and then
1970,
the
what it say on there, two, I think.
Pretty cool.
What year is it?
Was this your personal picture?
Pretty neat. Thank you for bringing that.
I guess, I didn't take it.
Yeah.
I was wondering, who the Dennis McCartney is that took it. Dennis McCartney.
Get it in
Oh my
as public
gosh.
testimony.
Two.
I'll ask him about
So
it.
here's a good
Just
example
jazz
of, ideas that sound good on paper but don't actually pan out.
Oh, I heard about that.
Is that the gateway to,
That was
The
taken
Gateway
out.
Gladstone.
Yeah. That used to be right on Dartmouth.
That's the bicentennial, 1976. They put a flagpole up, they put everything
Okay.
up there. That's why they put that in there, 76 is the bicentennial celebration.
When did they remove it?
Well, not long after.
Well, having a park out in the middle of the road for kids to play in the pool is a great idea.
Too
It
funny.
reminds me of our
People
training,
probably
right?
wouldn't go for that today.
There's telephone poles in the middle of the street.
Right.
We'll make the
Too
motion.
I'll be
funny.
in there. I spend a lot of time at that house
That's
right
pretty
there.
cool.
Really, at the Ansel House?
Yep.
You and Todd buddies?
We went to school
So
together.
you remember that?
Oh, absolutely.
I
yeah.
heard about
Do you
it.
know who any of
Don't
those people
remember.
are? That's,
Been longer than you have.
those are...
He's been here
Yeah,
longer than you
Kelly.
have.
No, I don't know her.
And Brenda.
Are we adjourning the meeting?
Pretty quick.
Okay.
Okay, I'm done,
But
so
I live
does
down
anybody
East
want to make a motion to adjourn?
Les does.
All right, I have the floor. I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed, meeting adjourned.
Thank
So
you.
I'm gonna show
Thank
this to
you.
the public and I'm gonna get
I was
back.
Bang on
gonna
that
say
keyboard.
there, okay, I know that there used to be, the
Good
fountain
job.
out there.